Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook. One Piece. Opening Valley of Gods, Dark Fruit. Chapter 81. Roar. Roaring sounds resounded over the entire Mariajoy. Within the Topman family, a huge wild boar stood up from the ruins. It was Vachuli who had completely turned into a beast. And his fruit is the form of Zone Phantom beast species. At this moment, a black flame cloud was wrapped around his body. He raised one hoof and stepped heavily on the ground. He stared at Garen with red eyes and made a pig noise from his mouth. From the beginning to the end, Galen's expression did not change at all. He put his hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist and slowly pulled it out. The next second, Vachuli roared, a large amount of water vapor floated around his body, the four thick fangs turned into black, and the huge body rushed towards Garen. Garen unsheathed his sword. A strange red light flashed across his pupils, and the red and black lightning on the sword was already crackling. The moment Vachuli rushed towards him, he swung his sword in a crescent-shaped arc, and a red sword energy that tore the earth burst out. Zhengguo. The sword energy collided with Vachuli, and a strong wave spread, raising everything around to the ground. Click, click, click. Fine cracks began to appear on Vachuli's four fangs, and huge beads of sweat appeared on his huge pig head. Finally, a clear cracking sound was heard, and all four fangs shattered. Just as the sword energy was about to fall on Vachuli's forehead, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him, holding a knife to resist the impact of the sword energy. The body of the visitor was also wrapped with black flame clouds. The lower body was a horse body made of bones, and the upper body was the image of a bald old man wearing a kimono. He is Saint Nasholang, one of the 5 elders. Not only him, but the other 5 elders also appeared on the scene. Sardan glanced around the dilapidated environment with a solemn expression. Nasushiro narrowed his eyes, and a thick layer of frost began to appear on his sword. Then he slashed hard, completely dispersing the sword energy. With a soft breath, Nasushiro released his human animal form and landed in front of Vachuli. He turned around and glanced at Vachuli, who looked slightly embarrassed, and asked, "Saint Vachuli, what's going on?" Vachuli also returned to his human form, and it was obvious that 4 big teeth were missing from his mouth. He wiped the blood from his mouth and said bitterly, "It was Garen who broke into my family for no reason and released the conquerors in front of me. He is simply lawless." After hearing this, Nasuhiro turned to look at Galen and asked in a gentle voice, "Shang Jalain, do you want to explain this?" Clang. Jalain sheathed his sword, and before he could speak, Sardan stepped forward and said, "I think there must be some misunderstanding between Saint Galen and Saint Vachuli. Let's go to the meeting hall to sit down and have a good talk." Vachuli immediately raised his eyebrows in anger when he heard this, and said angrily, "Satan, look at how my family has been destroyed. You just want to cover this up with a simple misunderstanding." Sardan's expression remained unchanged, as steady as an old dog, and he responded, "Then what do you think? The battle between you two made too much noise. What will other people think when they see it later? In your eyes, the majesty of our 5 elders and the Knights of God is not as good as these broken bricks. Is it important?" As soon as he put on this big hat, Vachuli's old face had a constipated expression, and he looked very disgusted. The man wearing the crown came close to Galen and whispered, "Captain, Saint Satan's mouth is really good. Although Sardan thinks that people are old, his ears are really good." The wrinkles on his face twitched when he heard this. After coughing a few times, he looked at the other 5 elders and asked, "What do you think?" Nasushiro held the sword in his arms, nodded after thinking for a moment, and said, "Well, you're right, we should straighten things out first." The remaining 5 elders also nodded in agreement. When Sardan saw this, he didn't care about Vachuli. He looked directly at Garen and said, "Shang Jalain, before going to the meeting hall, can you ask your men to go back first, otherwise it will be too ostentatious." Galen was still very respectful to Sardan, and turned around and issued an order for the crown man and the golden armored guards led by Carlos to leave. But before leaving, Wang Guanan suddenly said to Jalain, "Captain, if you haven't come back before dark, I will summon the Knights of God immediately." After saying that, he glanced at Vachuli, who looked ugly, turned around and left with the golden armored guards. Arriving at the meeting hall, the 5 elders sat down in their seats, while Galen sat on the chair with his legs crossed as before. Seeing Galen's casual look, Wachuli's pent-up anger finally burst out, and he shouted angrily. Garen, if you can't give a reasonable explanation today, you won't be the leader of the Knights of God. These words directly made Galen laugh. He sneered and glanced at Sardan first. Sardan spread his hands, which meant, this has nothing to do with me. I won't support him anyway. Wachuli glared at Sardan and said, I know some people will disagree. It doesn't matter. I will report this matter to Lord Yim Sheng when the time comes. Seeing that Wachuli actually moved Imdu out, the remaining people looked at each other, and Sardan became silent. Only Jelaine looked calm. He tapped the table lightly and said calmly, Okay, I really want to ask, who gave you the power to send someone to monitor my nephew? Is it Master Imshung? As soon as these words came out, everyone's eyes focused on Wachuli's old face again, and he quickly realized that Aramu had sold him out. Thoughts were racing in his mind, and he wanted to make a few excuses, but since Galen said this, it meant that he must have sufficient evidence, such as this guy Aramaki. If he didn't speak at this time, it would be equivalent to acquiescing. The remaining 4-5 elders immediately understood. Sardan naturally would not miss this opportunity and asked directly, Saint Wachuli, why did you send someone to monitor Saint Galen's nephew? Under the gaze of everyone, Vasily's face was uncertain. The reason why he did this was naturally because he did not want to see the power of the Figolando family spread to Marine. He had felt something was wrong ever since Jige emerged in Marine. If Jige was allowed to develop and he became a senior executive in Marine, would the world government, especially the orders he issued, be able to execute smoothly in the future? You know, Jige is the heir of the Figolando family. Other senior officials dare not say no to world government's orders, but he really dares and has the confidence to do so. Once the Figolando family takes complete control of Marine, wouldn't it be like having one of his 5 elders' arms cut off? This is absolutely unacceptable to him. Wachuli felt quite helpless at this time. He had no hope of Sardan wearing the same pants as Garen, but the remaining 3-5 elders were not very reliable either. Nasushiro began to clean the sword in his arms again, and Wachuli really wanted to put the sword in his mouth. Satan was still asking relentlessly, Sheng Wachuli, what do you mean by not speaking? Wachuli clenched his fists, and his voice came out from between his teeth. I just think it's not a problem for Saint Jige to stay in the Marine as the heir of the Figolando family, so I sent someone to observe him. It would be best to find an opportunity to bring him back and return to Mariajoy. The other 5 elders frowned for this reason, and Galen even laughed and said, Then I would like to thank you for your concern for my nephew. Wachuli was so overwhelmed that he didn't dare to say anything back, so he chose to remain silent. Galen didn't push him anymore. After all, he was almost done with his anger. Today's incident was a warning to Wachuli, telling the old guy not to put his evil thoughts on Jige again. Standing up from the chair, Galen raised his hand and waved, and said casually, That may really be a misunderstanding, but my nephew won't bother you Wachuli from now on. If there is another similar misunderstanding, it won't end so well. With that said, Galen walked to the door and suddenly stopped, turned around and smiled. By the way, Saint Wachuli, the man you sent to Marine seems to be called Aramu. My nephew is very fond of him and he also intends to join me. Let him stay in Marine. The sea is quite chaotic now. Don't waste talents. After saying that, without waiting for Wachuli to speak, Garen disappeared directly from the door. The other 4-5 elders glanced at Wachuli, said hello and left one after another. When only Wachuli was left in the meeting hall, he suddenly slammed the table and said through gritted teeth, Aramu, you really blinded that dense fruit in vain. ... In Marine school. Sneeze. Aramaki, who was training with Aokiji, suddenly sneezed. Aokiji didn't stop the car and punched Aramaki in the face, causing him to stagger and almost sit on the ground. La. I'm so sorry Aramaki, I didn't mean it. Aokiji hurriedly stood upright and looked at Aramaki with an apologetic expression. Aramaki glared at Aokiji fiercely, waved his hand and released a vine for him to fly away, and cursed secretly. What a bad luck. Why do you want me to meet this idiot? Huh. Aramaki was cursing when he suddenly felt his feet getting cold. When he looked down, he found that his feet had been frozen to the ground. A layer of ice slowly approached, and a human-shaped ice sculpture emerged from the ice. It was the same person who had been slapped by him just now. Flying Aokiji. Aokiji hugged his waist and said accusingly as soon as they met. Aramaki, we are conducting physical training, how can you use your fruit ability? Aramaki rolled his eyes helplessly, his legs shook and the ice cracked, and then he punched Aokiji in the stomach with an iron fist wrapped in armed colors. Aokiji's eyes widened from the punch. Before he could recover, Aramu's fists came like raindrops and he said while beating. Train, train, you want physical training, right? Lousy will satisfy you today. Aokiji, this poor kid, hadn't mastered the weaponry yet, and was quickly beaten up by Aramaki, who kept shouting. Stop, stop, stop. I don't know how to be armed. This is not fair. Aramaki had no intention of stopping, and continued ola ola, dissing Long by the way. Fair, what bothers Lousy the most is this word. Go talk to that stupid dragon about fairness. Call. A strong wind blew by, and Long suddenly appeared behind Huangmu and said coldly. Who are you talking about? Huangmu raised his eyebrows, turned around and saw the Dragon Queen, and immediately sarcastically said. Huh, isn't this a wind-pulling dragon? Does it look like you are well trained? Long squinted his eyes, glanced at Aokiji who was holding his face and sighing, and said. What's the point of bullying a newcomer who doesn't know how to fight? How about we compete? He had been very angry with Aramu that day, and on top of that, he heard Aramu say bad things about him, and the frustration he felt in the past few days also burst out at this moment. Aramaki raised his chin and said arrogantly, okay, to be honest, I wanted to deal with you the day I joined the army. Me too. As soon as he finished speaking, a gust of wind suddenly rose around Long, causing Huangmu's face to tremble wildly, showing a kind of beauty in appearance. Click, click, click. The ground cracked, and countless thick tree roots emerged from the gaps, connecting to Aramaki's feet. What stood out about the duel between the two Logias was the huge momentum that attracted the attention of all the students on the training ground. Aokiji looked at the two of them in confusion and thought. What's going on? Why did these two people suddenly start fighting? Just as he was stunned, a gravitational force suddenly pulled him upside down, and with a final snap, his back was pressed against a hand. Aokiji turned his head suddenly and found Jie looking at him with a smile. He said quickly, Senior Jie, Huangmu and Long are about to fight. They are not training. Go and stop it. Not long ago, after the battle between Jie and the three dragons ended, Zephyr asked Jie to guide other students in the school in the future in view of Jiji's strength enough to serve as vice admiral, and when he was away, the students in the school all matters can be temporarily managed by Jie. After all, judging from that battle, whether it was physical skills or hockey, Jie already had this qualification, not to mention that he was also a rear admiral himself, and the students all admired him. With Jie here, Zephyr has a lot of leisure time, but Kong will not let such an important combat force like him drink tea in the headquarters and will give him several tasks from time to time. Zephyr was originally a retired admiral, and now he was dragged out again. However, since he accepted a group of students like Jie, his morale has improved a lot, and he readily accepted the task. Zephyr is not in the school today. As the hidden second in command, Jie naturally has to take on the responsibility of managing the school. Jie glanced at the confrontation between Long and Aramaki, patted Aokiji on the shoulder and said, Don't panic, let me see how Long is recovering first. Aokiji was stunned by these words and asked hesitantly. But they have even used their fruit abilities, which will seriously damage the venue. When Teacher Zephyr comes back. Relax, I'll observe the situation first. If they make too much trouble, I will take action. Long slowly raised his hand, and a mini version of the tornado appeared in his palm. Aramaki sneered, and all his fingers turned into tentacle-like vines. Seeing this, the newcomers on the field all moved towards Jiji's position. When they got closer, they discovered that their seniors had already stood here. There is no way, Jie, Kazaru, Akainu and others can give people a strong sense of security just by standing here. With these people around, they can just watch the show with peace of mind. After all, Logia's battle scenes are still very shocking. With the boss shaking around them, the students had begun to relax and talk. Hey, isn't that a dragon? I haven't seen him since school started. He's recovering from his injuries. Didn't you see how badly he was treated by Senior Jije that day? It's not because he was arrogant. I heard it the day he joined the army. He came up and started giving instructions to Senior Jije like a dumbass. Who asked him to be Logia? He is also the son of Vice Admiral Garp. Of course he is different from us. TCH. What's so great about this? Senior Jije is also a Logia. Tisk tisk, he defeated 3 people with Logia abilities in one go. He is indeed my idol. Yeah, look at Senior Jije's calm look, my god. I really admire him so much. Okay, wipe your saliva, what kind of nymphomaniac are you doing as a man? Quote. As a user with the ability of the wind and wind fruit, Long has extremely keen perception. The student's comments reached his ears along the wind, making his face look even more ugly. Aramaki had actually been observing Jije's movements. After confirming that Jije had no intention of stopping him, he picked his nose and flicked a black booger towards the dragon opposite. The booger passed through Long's body and landed on the ground at his feet. Although it didn't touch him, Long still had a look of disgust on his face and said, "You are so disgusting." He suddenly threw the tornado in his hand towards Huang Mu, and a dandelion grew out of his back and floated away in the wind. The dragon turned into the wind and wanted to chase, but the ground under his feet suddenly cracked. A huge piranha flower opened its mouth, revealing a row of dark teeth. The dragon's face changed. Nani. It was just. Puff. The piranha flower suddenly closed and swallowed the dragon whole. Seeing this, Huang Mu in the sky laughed and said, "How's it going? How does it feel to have booger in your mouth?" As a vegetative person, the boogers he took out just now can naturally be turned into seeds, and he was also entangled with armed-colored seeds. "You fool." The dragon's curse rang out from the piranha's mouth. Then, the piranha exploded, and a hurricane rose into the sky. Several wind blades shot out from it, and Aramaki's body was cut into several pieces in an instant. However, soon, thin branches sprouted from these pieces of body, and they were quickly connected together. Aramaki crossed his arms and sneered. "This kind of trick is useless to me. The element of wind has no entity, and you can't attach Haki to the invisible wind with your armament color attainments." Long said with a cold face. "So what? Haha, let's try this, snake strangulation." Aramaki spread out his arms and turned into 2 thick tree trunks, from which a large number of wooden thorns spurted out, and each thorn tip shone with a dark luster. Immediately afterwards, all the wooden thorns grew crazily and pounced on the dragon in the center from all directions. The attack range of this move is really too large, and it is armed, which directly blocks the dragon's retreat. Long's eyes focused, and the air currents around his body gathered, forming a spherical shield made of wind around his body. Wind barrier. The rushing wooden thorns were crushed into pieces by the violent wind the moment they touched, but there were too many wooden thorns. Soon, the barrier began to flicker, and finally dissipated completely with a pop. Fortunately, Aramu's attack had reached the end of its strength. Long shouted, released a spiral hurricane, crushed the remaining wooden thorns, broke away, and rushed towards Aramu on the opposite side. Aramaki raised a pair of thick eyebrows, entered the tree man state, and fought with the charging dragon. He used to be a member of CP0, so he was naturally not weak in physical skills. After all, Kalong had received one-on-one tutoring from Garp. At first, the two of them fought back and forth, but as time went on, Aramu's side had already clearly showing signs of decline. In the close state, the dragon can use physical attacks that entangle Haki, and it also has the cutting property of wind. On the other hand, Aramaki is at a bit of a disadvantage. After the distance is shortened, his fruit ability can only grow vines or wooden thorns from his body to harass him, but plants without Haki attached can easily be crushed by the dragon's wind. Aramaki's armament Haki was not in a state where he could use it casually, so he had to fight hard, but the dragon caught him once and knocked him out of the air with a dragon's claw. With a bang, Aramu's body fell to the ground and made a big pit. Dragon followed closely, raised his hands to condense a spherical wind ball, and threw it into the big pit where Aramu was. The wind mass exploded in the pit, erupting into a powerful airflow storm that crushed everything underground. A seed floated out of the pit, and immediately began to grow after falling on the ground. A large number of vines were spliced together, and Aramu's body was once again condensed. Aramaki looked a little uncomfortable. He was lying on the ground panting. Aokiji in the distance saw this and shouted. Aramaki, stop fighting. If you continue to fight, you will be injured. Aramaki raised his eyebrows, and he wanted to say something to Aokiji out of habit, but when he turned around and saw Aokiji with a worried look on his face, he couldn't help but froze for a moment. He stood up and muttered. TCH, who wants you, an idiot, to meddle in other people's business? As he spoke, he raised his eyes to look at the dragon slowly descending from the sky, and said to himself. I can't let you, an idiot, look down upon me. Forbidden hatred. Aramaki directly entered the giant tree ant form and rushed towards the fallen dragon with a sea of trees. The dragon brought up a hurricane and collided with Aramu. In fact, the difference in strength between the two is not too big, especially on the ground, where Aramu has the upper hand, and Long has a much harder time dealing with it than in the sky. Therefore, it is impossible for Long to defeat Aramu in a short period of time. During this period, Aramu continued to verbally attack Long. Long had a sullen face and did not talk back because he was confident that he could win. The more Aramu talked, he would let him go later. The worse he loses. After the two fought against each other for a while, Huang Mu could no longer hold on, and the giant tree man's body collapsed. Seeing this, Long, who was in a better condition than him, couldn't help but show a victor's smile on his face, and used his unique trick, Dragon Hook and Claw, to attack Huang Mu. At this time, Aramaki has reached his limit. Once this move hits, it means the battle is over. Just when Long was about to enjoy the joy of victory, a dark Uzumaki emerged from his side, and Jije finally took action. With a snap, Long's wrist was firmly grasped by Jije, and Jiji's soft voice came from his ears, which was covered in sweat. Okay, that's it for now. Puff. Long spurted out blood, and he didn't know whether he was tired or angry. He stared at a pair of red eyes and said angrily. Why, the battle is not over yet. Jije said calmly. When I say it's over, it's over. This sentence carried an undeniable tyranny. After hearing this, Huang Emu's face flushed with joy, and he shouted crazily in his heart. This is pure celestial dragons. Long couldn't accept it. He who respected equality couldn't stand this kind of power. His forehead felt hot and he wanted to break free. Jiji's hands remained motionless as he whispered. You asked for this. Buzz. The rising darkness surged in Jiji's hand, releasing a twisted gravity that instantly twisted Long's wrist into a twist. Ah! Heart-rending screams resounded through the sky. Long Pain's face was ferocious. He squatted down while covering his miserable-looking wrist, his teeth clenched. The students watching the battle were so frightened that they froze in place. In their hearts, Jije had always been very easygoing, and they had never seen Jije show such a cold side. Jessica tugged on Ginny's sleeve and asked softly, Ginny, are you afraid of Jije like this? Ginny shook her head and said, if you're not afraid, what's that? Brother Jije is much more ruthless in fighting than this. He will only be gentle to his own people. Then how can I become who you say you are? Haha, Jessica, why are you so nervous? Don't worry, Brother Jije has a good impression of you. He won't hit you. Why did he treat me? Because the dishes you cooked at the last party were really delicious. Brother Jije also said that if there is a chance in the future, he will invite you to be the chef on his warship. No, my military rank is not enough to serve as a chef. GGE's warship organization is at the general level. What's the point? If you are willing, this kind of thing is just a matter of words for Brother Jije. Jessica's pretty face turned red. She lifted her blonde hair from her forehead and whispered. I will definitely work harder. Jije looked at Long, who was in so much pain that he could no longer express his pain. He turned around and waved to the crowd watching, saying, come on, 2 people, and carry him to the infirmary. Many male students heard this and ran over subconsciously. Finally, Jije designated 2 people, one of whom carried Long to the infirmary. After arranging things, Jije also praised Huang Mu. Aramaki, your performance in the battle was very good, and you also knew how to obey orders. I will reward you with 3 days of vacation. Go back and have a good rest. After receiving Jiji's praise, Aramaki immediately felt refreshed, and all the fatigue in his body seemed to be swept away. In fact, he doesn't need much rest. His injuries are not serious. The main reason is that his physical strength is exhausted. As a vegetative person, he just needs to get more sun for photosynthesis. A few days later, when Zephyr returned to marine school, he saw nearly 1/3 of the training ground destroyed, and a dragon with bandages on his hands and a gloomy face. Seeing this, Zephyr's first reaction was that he didn't know how the dragon provoked Ji-jae. But then he thought about it. With Ji-jae's strength, it would not cause so much damage to take down a dragon. When he asked Ji-jae about the reason, he couldn't help but feel a headache. However, Long stood up very confidently and said, "Teacher Zephyr, I think Senior Ji-jae is targeting someone personally, and you should take back his temporary management rights." As soon as these words came out, the students on the field looked at Long with stupid eyes. Huang Mu, who was standing on the left of Long, was the first to jump out and said with a close face, "You're the only one who's causing trouble. If you don't accept it, go back to East Blue." Long snorted coldly and said, "My defeated general, I advise you to be quiet." After hearing this, Huang Mu's main purpose was to show off his face. He immediately raised his chin and said with disdain, "Who do you think is the loser? If Senior Ji-jae hadn't stopped me that day, I would have beaten you to paralysis." Long gritted his teeth and cyclones began to appear around his feet. Aramu became more and more arrogant and said, "Hey, you want to fight, right? I'll accompany you. If you lose, you'll be my grandson." As he said that, he looked at Long's bandaged hand with evil intentions. His mean look made people want to slap him. Long thought so too, but the pain from his hand still suppressed his impulse. At this time Ji-jae took the initiative to stand up and said, "I'm sorry, Teacher Zephyr, I was too harsh. People are biased, and Zephyr naturally has a filter for his best student, and he had no intention of blaming Ji-jae." So, under Long's astonished gaze, Zephyr just waved his hand casually and said, "You just performed your duties. You have nothing to apologize for." Teacher Zephyr, "Okay, Long, you should pay attention to your character. Your classmates are not enemies." Long looked at Zephyr in disbelief, and then looked at the expressions of approval on the other students' faces. At this moment, he suddenly felt like he was being criticized. In his opinion, all this is ultimately because he provoked Ji-jae when he joined the army. Long lowered his arms feebly, feeling an emotion called disappointment in Marine's heart. He originally thought he could find like-minded companions in Marine, but the reality gave him a loud blow. Isn't everything that's happening now the injustice he hates the most? He no longer defended himself, but said, "I understand," in a low voice, and then fell silent in the team. Even though Aramaki kept making provocative expressions at him, he remained indifferent. Zephyr sighed silently and thought to himself, "Garp, Garp, this son of yours is really a headache." Ji-jae narrowed his eyes and raised an imperceptible smile at the corner of his mouth. What he is doing now is, to put it bluntly, he is targeting someone, and it is clear that he is looking for trouble with Long. Of course, this was also because Long himself came to the door that day, giving him a reason to deal with him reasonably. From that day on, Long's emotions were explosively guided by Ji-jae. His purpose is to force Long to defect to Marine, and the bigger the noise, the better. Then he can have a justice trial. No matter how bad it is, we can't let Long leave Marine normally and quietly form a revolutionary army like in the original work. By the time the world government finds out, it's already too late. The butt determines the head. Ji-jae, as a celestial dragons, of course cannot see the revolutionary army grow, because world government is his force. In the following days, Long, with the halo of Garp's son, and Logia, seemed to become a transparent person in the school. During the day, he trained alone, and at night, he returned to the dormitory, listening to Aokiji and Aramaki's daily bickering, silently turning his head to the wall. Only Zephyr and Ji-jae in the school would pay attention to him. Zephyr's concern was obvious. After all, he was the son of his old friend Garp, and he was indeed very talented. He couldn't leave the dragon alone for both emotional and rational reasons. Ji-jae has been observing the dragon's behavior, waiting for the opportunity to take action. However, Long has become more honest since that day. He trains very seriously every day and concentrates on improving his strength. Another year has passed in the blink of an eye, and Ji-jae's school life has come to an end. Marine senior management has always attached great importance to their students, especially the arrangements for GJ and others. But before that, they first have to arrange a graduation exam for GJ and others. The senior executives all want to see how far the monsters in this class have reached in terms of strength. The content of the exam is also very simple. It is divided into two parts, written test and practical test. Of course, the written test is just a formality. It only accounts for a small part of the score. As long as the theoretical knowledge is not too poor, it will basically not be used for the final test, has a great impact on the performance. Actual combat is the highlight of this exam. It is conducted in the form of a competition. Students who are about to graduate will draw lots in groups to determine their opponents. The final results will also determine the job placement after graduation, and the highest level will be directly awarded the rank of Rear Admiral. This kind of simple and crude reward is really very tempting to most students, but when they think of GJ and others in the same class, they suddenly wilt again. Especially GJ. No one knows how far his strength has grown over the past year or so. Kizaru, Akainu and Shang alone are already invincible in their eyes, but in daily training, at least 2 people are needed to barely compete with GJ. Obviously everyone is a student of the same class, but after 3 years, the gap has not narrowed, but has become wider and wider, like a natural chasm lying in front of them. So when this announcement came down, people in the school were immediately panicked. They all had the same idea, that is, what if I draw one of GJ? We can't blame them for being timid. After all, the gap in strength is really too big. It's not possible to win by shouting slogans. But after Zephyr announced something, their worries immediately dissipated. Zephyr said that GJ, Kizaru and Akainu will not appear in the lottery during the graduation exam. The exam headquarters for the 3 of them has other arrangements. Although there are still 4 bears left in Marine Supernova, this is good news for everyone. Compared to the 3 Logia dads, Shang usually looks gentle and quiet, with a sense of simplicity, which gives people like Flying Squirrel Huoshuashan the illusion that even if they really face Shang, they have no chance of winning. As for the remaining 3 Lucias, their strength seems to be within the understanding of most people, not to mention that all of them are beautiful women. Many male students feel that it is not a bad thing if they really encounter each other, at least they can still it's eye-catching, isn't it? The graduation exam was decided, and in the remaining days, all the students who were going to take the exam were training hard. This scene is very familiar to GJ. He remembers that when he was in college at Blue Star, he and several roommates would review like this crazily a few days before each final exam. Moreover, there is a tradition in their dormitory, that is, everyone will pay homage to GJ the day before the final exam, because the homophony of his name means passing. This is how college exams are, not seeking high scores but seeking passing. It's just that GJ is now considered a real student master, the kind who consistently ranks first, so he is not nervous at all, and still practices step by step every day, eating and drinking when he should. On the day of the exam, under the leadership of Zephyr, all Marine School students went to the exam venue set up by the headquarters. When GJ arrived, he discovered that the so-called exam venue was actually the huge open space from Summit War in the anime. On the high platform where the 3 admirals were originally, Marshal Sora sat in the center position. Garp, he and other Marine senior officials were also present. After Zephyr explained the exam rules again, a soldier came over and saluted Zephyr and said, "Zephyr Admiral, please go to the spectator seats." Zephyr nodded, and after the soldiers left, he said to GJ, Akainu and Kizaru, "You 3 are already Rear Admirals. During the other students' exams, you go up there with me to watch." As soon as these words came out, all the students were in an uproar, but it was right to think about it. The only ones who could go to the viewing area today were officers above the Rear Admiral level. After all, the situation of the 3 GJ is indeed too special. They already had the rank of Rear Admiral when they were students. Others have been living with them day and night, but it is easy for them to ignore their identities. At this moment, other people can deeply feel the gap between strength and status. Under the complicated eyes of everyone, GJ and the other 3 followed Zephyr to the viewing seats on the high platform. The chairs placed here are the same as those where the 3 admirals were sitting during Summit War, and the seats of the 3 GJ were also deliberately separated, probably because the 3 of them are also candidates. Akainu and Kizaru sat on one side respectively, both agreeing to leave the middle position to Jijie. Jijie smiled slightly and sat down between the two of them. The postures of the three of them were surprisingly consistent after sitting down. They were all in a difficult cross-legged position, with one calf resting across the knee of the other. The three of them were sitting like this, and the students and junior students below them all felt inexplicably at ease after seeing them. The surrounding senior officials were also observing the three of them. He leaned slightly to Sengoku and said, "Sengoku, who among the three of them do you think will become the admiral first?" Sengoku was stunned for a moment, and said somewhat dumbfounded, "Why do you seem to have made up your mind when you say this?" He shook his head and said seriously, "It's just a matter of time." Okay, I think it's Jijie then." "Me too." After he finished speaking, he turned his attention to Jijie again. Jijie also raised his head at this moment and looked at he. At this moment, the referee came to the center of the field and announced through the loudspeaker, "The exam begins." After the exam began, one group after another of students came on stage to compete. This class of students is indeed the first class taught by Zephyr. Almost everyone has mastered hockey, and can learn at least one or two of the 6 moves. These 2 points alone are already a superhuman-level existence outside. Although the much-anticipated marine supernovas have not yet appeared, the senior management is already very satisfied with the quality of this class of students. However, the senior officials also noticed that the students were clearly divided into different grades. For people like Flying Squirrel and Huo Shaoshan, other students were obviously far behind them in terms of strength. This also makes them look forward to more what kind of strength the remaining 4 marine supernovas will have. Finally, it was the bear's turn to play, and the unlucky guy who drew him was Dalmesha, one of the future vice admirals of the team. Dalmesha came on stage with half a dog face. He is Zone's ability user and takes the form of a Madara dog. Ever since he ate the devil fruit, he has basically ceased to be a human being and is usually in human animal form. Although it doesn't look good, it can indeed maximize the benefits of Zone devil fruit to the body. And as for Madara's dog form, maybe entering the beast form will still negatively increase her strength. However, even if Dalmesha develops the half-animal form of Madara, there is nothing she can do against the bear's flesh ball fruit. The most difficult thing is that an ordinary zone fruit may not be as good as the Baconian bloodline of the bear itself. Even if it is called a human fruit and a Baconian form, it is not an exaggeration. On the field, Dalmesha looked helpless at the hill-like bear standing opposite. Listening to the cheers of the Flying Squirrel and others below, he felt a sense of gloating. Under the referee's instruction, the 2 fist bumped and then distanced themselves. After the referee announced the start, Dalmesha directly used the shave and appeared in front of the bear with a swish. Then, he raised his armor-colored claws and used the finger pistol he was best at. The bear stretched out his hand to block finger pistol's attack with the pads of his palms. Dalmesha's expression changed and she quickly shaved away from the bear, as if she was avoiding the plague. Who in the school doesn't know how terrifying a bear's pair of pads is? That's not for showcasing cuteness. He had been practicing hard for a long time but was still slow in the face of the bear's ability. The bear just moved his feet slightly and caught up with Dalmesha in an instant. In the latter's panicked gaze, the bear slapped him on the back, and with a bang, a bear paw-shaped pit appeared on the ground, with Dalmesha lying in the center of the pit in a large shape. It was the first time for many generals and new students to see Shang's abilities, and their mouths opened wide in shock when they saw this scene. In their opinion, Dalmesha is already very good. Haki, who is very skilled in all 6 forms and has demon fruit power, is so vulnerable in front of the bear. However, Shang's strength was not even among the top 3 in Supernova. Everyone couldn't help but look at Jijie and the 3 people on the high platform, and the same question came to their minds. How strong are these 3 people? The referee came to Dalmesha. He had not lost consciousness yet and just said weakly, "I lost." The referee was about to announce the result of the game, but Shang suddenly leaned down, gently lifted Dalmesha, and put his hand on him. A red bubble popped out of the bear's paw, and the originally wilted Dalmesha suddenly became lively and energetic. He collapsed twice, and then said to the bear with a grateful face, "Thank you, Shang. I would like to trouble you for treatment." The bear smiled and shook his head and said, "It's fine." The referee was dumbfounded, but it was Dalmisia who took the initiative to remind him. He quickly wanted to hold the bear's hand and declare the winner. However, what was embarrassing was that after he held the bear's hand, the bear lifted it, and he also lifted it, got up. Shang carefully put the referee down. His gentleness was in sharp contrast to his appearance. He also won a burst of thunderous applause. Ji on the high platform smiled slightly, waved his hand, and the dark Bible flew down from his palm, absorbing the bear paw bubbles floating in the air. Some people who didn't know the bear's ability were a little confused. They didn't know what Ji meant by doing this. The knowledgeable people next to him explained it to them, which aroused another wave of amazement. After watching the battle between the bears, everyone is increasingly looking forward to the battle between the remaining marine supernovas, especially Ji and the three people on the high platform. They are all guessing what the battle between the three will be like. Judging from the current situation, the three of them should be left at the end as the finale. Next, Ginny, Lucia and Guillaume also appeared one after another, and they all defeated their opponents easily. Lucia didn't even use her abilities. As more and more students were eliminated, finally, the supernovas faced each other. Guillaume held Gold Pyrrha, looked at Lucia opposite with a smile, and said, "I've wanted to compete with you for a long time, and finally I've been waiting for this opportunity." Lucia pulled out the pendant from her waist and said calmly, "Bring it on." As soon as he finished speaking, Guillaume raised his hand and swung out a sword energy, and Lucia also fought back with sword energy. The sword energy of the two people created a deep crack on the ground. The moment they collided, Lucia and Guillaume's figures disappeared at the same time. Chang, Zhu Yiming and Jinbaluo collided in midair. Both swords were wrapped with armed colors. After a brief stalemate, the two fell from the air and started a dazzling swordsmanship competition. The level of swordsmanship displayed by both sides put many generals who also used swords to shame. Lucia's expression was indifferent, and she waved her hand up and down, neutralizing all Guillaume's attacks. Guillaume was secretly frightened. Even now in the battle, Lucia in front of her still gave her an unfathomable feeling. She gradually increased the strength of her hand, and Lucia began to retreat until she was at the edge of the field. Guillaume seized the opportunity and slashed with her sword. A strand of black hair fell slowly, Lucia tilted her head, and a strange purple light flashed in her eyes. Guillaume wanted to continue attacking, but suddenly he felt a burning sensation coming out of his body, and the hand holding the knife couldn't help but tremble. Before she could figure out what was going on, purple flames ignited on Lucia's sunken light, and Guillaume was forced back several meters with a single blow. After Guillaume stabilized her body, she covered her chest with her hands. Her face was flushed and her breathing was rapid. She pursed her lips and murmured, "What a strange feeling. Is this also her ability?" She raised her head and glanced at Lucia, and her heart suddenly trembled. At this time, Lucia had a charming smile on her pretty face, completely different from her just now. Lucia gently shook her long purple hair, a pair of dark wings spread out from her back, and her whole personality changed drastically. Her wings shook, and before Guillaume could react, Lucia had appeared in front of her, waving the light in her hand. Guillaume hurriedly used Jinpyra to block his chest, but he was still sent up into the air by a powerful force. Lucia has entered the half-beast form, and both her speed and strength have been greatly improved. Guillaume quickly activated his armor, suppressed the heat in his body, and turned around in midair. However, Lucia's figure had already disappeared from the ground. "Aha!" Lucia appeared above Guillaume like a ghost and teased, "Where are you looking?" Guillaume's pupils shrank. She was not as agile as Lucia in the air. It was too late to fight back at this time, so she had to activate her armor again to cover key parts of her body for defense. It was impossible for Lucia to make a fatal move. She did not use the falling light, she just threw a punch wrapped in a weapon color and hit Guillaume hard on the back. This punch made Guillaume groan, and she fell rapidly. When she was about to hit the ground, she used moonwalk to stop it. Lucia slowly landed on the ground. Instead of taking care of Guillaume, she turned her head and smiled charmingly at Jige on the high platform. Jige held his forehead helplessly, and Kizaru on the side came over and said, "Jige, your cousin is smiling at you, why don't you respond? Reply for me, you have the most charming smile." "Well, let's forget it. I'm afraid your cousin will rush up and chop me." Guillaume landed on the ground holding his waist, using Kinpira to support himself on the ground. Lucia turned around and asked, still smiling, "Do you want to continue?" Guillaume took a deep breath and said, "No need, you are indeed stronger than me. If you had used a sword just now, the battle would have been over long ago." After saying that, she raised her hand to signal the referee, and then took the initiative to leave the field. Lucia deactivated her ability, secretly glanced at Gijay on the high platform, and ran back to the students with a blushing face. Ginny touched a silver-white pistol on her waist. It was her turn next time. Her opponent is the Ghost Spider. Before going on stage, Ghost Spider's hair started to dance, and he grabbed the 6 knives placed on the ground. He took out the 2 knives from his waist and walked to the field aggressively. He is one of the few students in the school who has mastered the return of life. Amidst the cheers of Jessica and other female students, Ginny patted her proud chest, pulled out 2 pistols, 1 gold and 1 silver, and walked out with cat steps like a model. When facing Ginny, Ghost Spider tried his best to control the muscles on his face and forced a smile to make himself look less fierce. He had no interest in beautiful women, but he just couldn't help it. Everyone in Marine School had acquiesced that Ginny was the big brother woman. Although Ginny seems to be the least conspicuous one in Supernova, she is actually the most unprovoked existence in the school besides Gijay. After entering the venue, Ginny first turned to Gijay and showed a charming smile. When she faced the Ghost Spider, the smile on her face had disappeared, and she looked attentive. Locked by Ginny's gaze, the Ghost Spider suddenly felt like his whole body was full of flaws. He quickly protected his 6 spider leg-like hairs in front of his body, and finally felt a little calmer. After the 2 got into position, the game began. Ghost Spider was the first to take action. He rushed in front of Ginny and launched a storm of attacks using the 8-sword style. Ginny's petite figure moved between the shadows of the sword, and she could accurately avoid the blade every time. Gijay on the high platform nodded slightly when he saw this. Ginny's talent in observation hockey is indeed top-notch. It is no wonder that she was able to crack the signal of the phone bug when she was in the Valley of the Gods. Seeing that the Ghost Spider could not hit her, it separated its hair again and turned into black tentacles, trying to wrap around Ginny. This move looks a bit evil. If it were on Blue Star, someone would shout pervert. Ginny also dislikes Ghost Spider's hair, maybe for the sake of better cohesion. Ghost Spider doesn't like washing her hair, so it looks shiny, which is really difficult for a girl like Ginny who loves cleanliness. Head. She quickly put her guns around her waist, turned her body over, put one hand on the ground, and assumed an inverted position. Then, she exerted force on her wrists to drive her body to swing. A pair of long white legs came together and rotated like a windmill as her body swayed. Tempest kick Joe Duan. Aha! A circular slash wave spread out, instantly cutting off the hair that came towards him. Ghost Spider quickly used his knife to protect his body, and the slash wave hit his blade and knocked him backwards. The distance between the 2 then widened, and this was the perfect opportunity for Ginny, as a gunner, to attack. Ghost Spider also realized this, and he immediately blocked the 8 knives in front and rushed towards Ginny, trying to get close again. Pulling out both guns and crossing her arms, Ginny fired several times. Each bullet accurately hit the spot where the Ghost Spider's hair was holding the knife, knocking the 6 knives holding by his hair to the ground. The Ghost Spider, who had only 2 knives left in his hands, could be said to have opened his door wide. Ginny narrowed her eyes, and her armed color was wrapped around the bullet in the gun chamber. Then, with another continuous shot, the Ghost Spider also wrapped hockey around the double swords and slashed at the incoming bullets several times. However, the bullet attached to hockey was not something he could easily cut off. After a brief operation, he looked down at the 2 smoking bullet holes in the clothes on his abdomen, smiled bitterly, and knelt down on the ground, covering his abdomen. The bullet did not penetrate his body. It can be said that Ginny controlled armament hockey's output just right. And with Ghost Spider's physique, even if a gunshot wound to a non-vital part was really penetrated, it would not be fatal. At most, it would only cause him to temporarily lose the ability to move. After calming down for a while, Ghost Spider also stood up and admitted defeat, and walked down with his head hanging down. Ginny cheered, turned around and blew a kiss to Gijay. The students watching below immediately burst into cheers, which actually made Ginny shy. She didn't dare to look at Jijay anymore and ran away covering her pretty face. As if running away. Kizaru cast an intriguing look at Jijay again, but Jijay simply ignored it. The exam continued until the afternoon, and a total of 2 groups were promoted. They are Bear and Flying Squirrel, Ginny and Lucia. There is no suspense about the results of these 2 groups. In the end, it is the showdown between Xiang and Lucia. Since it is getting late, the final is scheduled for tomorrow morning. When the winner is decided, the exam formats of the 3 Jijay will be announced one after another and will be held in the afternoon. The next day, more people came to watch the game than yesterday, and there were even many reporters. Many people want to see how far the 3 Logia ability users who attracted much attention when they first entered Marine have grown after 3 years of training. Of course, the final between the 2 supernovas Lucia and Xiang also attracted a lot of attention. A glamorous beauty and a burly man nearly 7 meters tall are very visually impactful just standing there. Xiang is not good at words, and Lucia rarely speaks to anyone except Jijay. So after the 2 came on the court, the atmosphere was surprisingly quiet. Even after the referee announced the start, the 2 remained motionless, seeming to be waiting for the other to make the first move. Finally it was Jijay on the high platform who spoke. "Lucia, you go first." As soon as she finished speaking, Lucia drew her sword instantly, and after slashing out a sword energy, she rushed towards the bear opposite her like a black light. The bear who had been standing like a sculpture finally moved. He raised his hand and swatted away the flying sword energy. The moment the sword energy disappeared, Lucia followed closely and swung his sword to kill. The bear slowly stretched out his palm again, using his flesh pad to block the slashing blow. Lucia looked at the blade stuck in the meat pad and narrowed her eyes. The ability of the meatball fruit was really tricky. Even a famous knife could not cause effective damage to the meat pad. If you want to defeat a bear, you have to avoid these pads and find opportunities to attack other body parts. The bear raised his other hand and patted Lucia. Dalmasha on the sidelines couldn't help but feel a chill down his back when he saw the bear's action. He was almost beaten by this move. However, Lucia was not comparable to Dalmasha in terms of both her fruit ability and her physical strength. She just tapped her toes on the ground and her figure disappeared instantly. Lucia teleported to the side and directly entered the human animal form, spread her wings and flew high into the sky. She looked down at the bear below, with a purple flame burning in her eyes. "I have fallen." The bear raised his head and looked at Lucia. He was absent-minded for just a moment before returning to normal again. A look of surprise appeared on Lucia's face when she saw this. She had clearly aroused the bear's inner desire, but the bear didn't seem to be affected much. "Did he use Haki to disable my fruit ability? His Haki is so strong." Jijay on the high platform suddenly said. "This guy Xiang, his desires are really low." He knew that the strength of Xiang's Haki was not enough to remove Lucia's ability so easily. The reason why he was not affected was entirely because Xiang himself was a person with low desires. The bear shook his head and thought, what was that warm feeling just now? After the bear was affected by Lucia's ability, what came to his mind was the picture of living with Jijay and Ginny in the church of Sorby country. He did think about how great it would be if he could continue to live like this. The painful and unbearable fire of desire only stimulated Xiang's yearning for a better life in his mind. It can only be said that one thing defeats another. Lucia doesn't know this, and she ultimately thinks it's the bear who uses the extremely powerful Haki. However, in addition to the special effects of her desire flames, its temperature is also extremely high, but it is more harmful to people with strong desires. Speaking of which, let's name a certain fruit in Logia. The purple flames on her body flourished, and Lucia completely entered the fallen angel form. Her long purple hair spread out, and she held the pendant in her hand high. Then, she slashed down the pendant that was burning with purple flames. Judgment Day. Boom! A pillar of purple flame fell from the sky, and a sea of fire erupted on the ground, submerging the bear's figure in it. The generals on the stage couldn't help but secretly smack their lips when they saw this scene. With this move, Lucia was the undisputed number 1 among the female students. Crane, the current strongest female Marine, was also filled with emotion. She knew best how difficult it was for a woman to possess such strength. Guillaume was silent. She had to admit that Lucia was much stronger than her. Her eyes reflected the raging purple flames on the field, and she thought to herself, if I also eat devil fruit, can I make up for the gap with her? Ginny looked at the sea of fire in the venue with a worried face and said, Lucia is really strong. Is Bear Boy okay? Lucia flapped her wings in the air, not daring to take her eyes off the ground for a moment. Suddenly, a huge transparent bear paw emerged from the center of the sea of fire, and then exploded instantly. The powerful impact directly dispersed the purple flames, clearing a large open space in the center of the field, revealing the figure of the bear. The bear squatted down with one hand on the ground. Below it was a bear paw-shaped pattern. The clothes on his upper body had several holes burned by the flames, and the skin below was blackened. Lucia's attack just now still had an effect. But with the bear's physical condition, this level of burns was completely within the acceptable range. He could even pop the pain out and push it onto Lucia's body. It's just that he wouldn't choose to use this trick against his own people. The bear gently rubbed his palms and then spread them out. The surrounding air quickly condensed between his palms, forming a huge bear paw bubble. He squeezed it with both palms, and the volume of the bubble began to shrink again, eventually forming a mini version of the bear's paw bubble. Students in the same class as Shang subconsciously took a step back when they saw this mini bubble. They knew the power of this move. Lucia's pupils also shrank. She had also seen this move by Shang when she was fighting the Whitebeard pirates. She immediately put the falling light on her chest, and her whole body burned with raging purple flames again, and then her whole body fell rapidly downwards like a purple meteor. Hammer of the Fallen Angel. The bear also pushed the compressed bear paw bubble toward Lucia at this moment. Bear paw impact. Boom. The explosion sounded, and a strong air flow was generated from the sky. A large number of black feathers fell down. Lucia slowly landed on the ground. She glanced at her bleeding left arm and said lightly, I lost. After saying that, Lucia turned around and left. Shang looked down and saw a sword mark extending diagonally from his shoulder to his waist. It was injured by a sword energy that just fell from the sky. Both of them were injured, but they both had strength. Lucia gave up because she believed that the bear was definitely better than her in terms of physical strength. Moreover, the bear can also use its fruit power to dispel fatigue and pain, so she feels there is no need to continue fighting. On the high platform, Gigi's figure has disappeared from the chair. Lucia walked with her head lowered, and suddenly a dark vortex appeared in front of her. She was stunned for a moment and murmured, Cousin. Gigi looked at Lucia's still bleeding arm and said softly, Does it hurt? Why don't you let the bear help you remove it? Lucia shook her head and said, It's okay. This kind of injury will be fine as long as you rest. And I don't want anyone other than the young master to touch me. Gigi frowned, reached out and flicked Lucia's smooth forehead lightly, and said, What's the point? Besides, we're still separated by clothes. Come with me. After speaking, without waiting for Lucia to respond, Gigi directly reached out and held Lucia in his arms like a princess, and disappeared in a flash. Shang had already used his ability to pop a pain bubble out of his body. Suddenly, Gigi appeared in front of him holding a red-faced Lucia. Gigi first released the Dark Bible to absorb the bear's painful bubbles, then put Lucia down and said to the bear with a smile, I still need to trouble you, Shang. My cousin is a bit stubborn. Lucia wanted to say something more, but Gigi stopped her with a look. He held down Lucia's shoulders and made her face him. The bear reached out and touched Lucia's back lightly, and the pain bubble popped up, and then also absorbed by Gigi using the Dark Bible. Looking at Lucia, who looked much more relaxed, Gigi smiled slightly and said to Shang, Bear, thank you. The bear scratched his head and said with some embarrassment, Brother, I wanted to do this just now, but Lucia walked too fast. Hey, she's stupid. Bear, you make me worry-free. Lucia pouted after hearing this. It was rare for her to show such a cute expression. Gigi couldn't help pinching her nose and said, Okay, Shang, your ability can't heal the injury. You two should bandage it quickly, especially you, Lucia. It won't look good on a girl if she leaves scars. Shang and Lucia both nodded obediently. Gigi watched the two being surrounded by a group of nurses and then used Kamui again to return to his position. Marshal Kong looked back at Jie. Jie raised his hand and said with a smile. I'm sorry, Marshal Kong, I've sorted out a few things. Kong, who was always known for his seriousness, seemed much more amiable towards Jie. He nodded and said, it's okay, you did a good job just now. We Marines just want to help each other. Jie responded with a smile. He looked around and couldn't find Zephyr, so he looked at Kizaru and Akainu and asked where Zephyr had gone. Kizaru spread his hands and said, I don't know where the old man went. He left when you went down just now. Akainu also said that he did not see it. Just as he was talking, Sora suddenly stood up and walked to the front of the high platform and said to the loudspeaker phone bug. Both students performed very well just now. I have decided to grant Bartholomew the Bear the rank of Rear Admiral and Lucia the rank of Commodore. In this way, Shang and Lucia's military ranks have been promoted by one level. According to their original levels, one level is already a huge leap. However, no one among the generals present raised any objections. Judging from the performance of the two just now, this reward is considered reasonable. The students below also applauded excitedly, but the two parties involved, Lucia and Shang, had the calmest expressions. They didn't care much about their military rank. After Kong finished speaking, he paused, looked back at Jie and the other three, and then said, next, we will announce the content of the afternoon exam, Jie, Sakazuki and Porisalino. Their opponent is only one person, and that is Admiral Zephyr. Quote exclamation mark question mark quote. As soon as these words came out, everyone was in an uproar, and even Jie himself looked surprised. He originally thought that each of the three of them would be assigned a vice admiral, but he did not expect that the headquarters would think so highly of the three of them, and they would serve as admirals directly. Although there is only one level between admiral and vice admiral, the difference in strength is completely different. It can be said that except for the special existence GARP in vice admiral, all the vice admirals in this department now may not be able to win an admiral if they are tied together. Externally, admiral is Marine's card and is absolutely responsible for combat power. When Kizaru heard the news, his face dropped immediately and he complained. Why old man, why not vice admiral GARP or Sengoku admiral? Akainu said nothing. He straightened the white marine hat on his head, his eyes filled with fighting intent. The reporters below were already going crazy. They raised their cameras and phones to the three Jie people on the high platform and took photos wildly. The student's graduation exam is actually assessed by Admiral himself. This will definitely be explosive news. The students watching became more and more excited. Aokiji clenched his fists and said excitedly, it's great, I finally get to see Senior Jie take action with all his strength. After hearing this, Aramaki rarely criticized Aokiji. He crossed his arms and said, HMPH, I just hope Sakazuki and Porisalino don't hold back Jie-senpai. Long lowered his head and said nothing. No one knew what he was thinking. Jessica said to Ginny with an annoyed look, what are those officers thinking? Admiral is so strong, if he hurts Jie, what will they do? Ginny patted Jessica on the shoulder like a big sister and said, don't worry, Admiral, brother Jie is the strongest. Quote. In the afternoon, the examination venue was already crowded with people. Many soldiers from the headquarters who had no missions rushed over. They also wanted to see Admiral take action. In the perception of ordinary soldiers, Admiral is invincible, and although they are soldiers in the headquarters, there are only a few who have actually seen Admiral take action. Speaking of which, once you encounter a battle that requires the participation of an admiral, the opponent will definitely not be a good opponent. If you encounter a stronger conquerors, ordinary soldiers will faint from the beginning, and the unlucky ones will die directly in the aftermath of the battle. No matter which world it is in, the fate of cannon fodder is so tragic. Jie, Kizaru and Akainu had already arrived on the field. After a while, Zephyr finally appeared wearing a marine cloak, and there was a burst of shouts from all around. Even though Zephyr has been semi-retired in recent years, his reputation among Marines is still frighteningly high. He slowly walked to the opposite side of Jie and the three of them, and threw out the marine cloak he was wearing. This action was indeed handsome. Jie couldn't help but regret after seeing it. She had known that he had also worn his marine cloak. Kizaru couldn't help curling his lips and muttered, The old man blames the bun burning. Only Akainu didn't pay attention to this, he had already started to warm up. Zephyr looked at the three people opposite and smiled slightly, saying, "Let the teacher test your achievements in the past 3 years today." Jie loosened his collar and glanced left and right at Kizaru and Akainu, who both responded with their eyes. Then, darkness, magma and flash, 3 Logia abilities exploded together. The surface of Jiji's body was filled with flowing darkness, Kizaru's entire body shone with dazzling golden light, and hot magma dripped from Akainu's body, leaving dark marks on the ground. Zephyr smiled slightly, bent his arms, and his armed colors instantly wrapped around him. Compared with the momentum of the 3 Jie, he seemed simple and unpretentious here. After a brief silence, Jiji's eyes focused, he exerted force on his feet, and flashed in front of Zephyr as if teleporting. This speed alone was beyond the comparison of the previous students. Jie kicked out in the air, and Zephyr immediately blocked it with his forearm. With a loud noise, the ground under their feet exploded, which stunned everyone present. Zephyr frowned slightly. He felt that his forearm was being twisted by an invisible force. If his weapon color were not strong enough, someone else might have his arm twisted off. The muscles on his arm swelled, and Zephyr was about to fight back when a golden flash of light flashed across his face. Kizaru had a signature smile on his face and launched a light-speed kick. However, Zephyr caught the extremely fast light-speed kick instantly, and even commented, "Pelusolino, with sparkling fruits speed boost, is this the only level of your kicks?" The smile on Kizaru's face disappeared instantly. Without saying a word, he took out the Amazon Cloud Sword and wanted Zephyr to try his sword skills again. At this moment, Akainu dragged a huge magma arm, like a heavy tank rushed over. Great eruption. Jie and Kizaru looked at each other, and in a flash, they disappeared from both sides of Zephyr. Zephyr faced the giant fist of magma with a calm expression, shouted low, and hit the hot magma with an iron fist. 2 fists of completely unequal size collided together, and the result was a huge magma fist that exploded and turned into scattered magma and flew towards the sidelines. Fortunately, none of the students in this class are weaklings. Lucia and others took action together to eliminate the incoming magma. Zephyr shook his hand, squatted down slightly, and then rushed out like a cannonball. The first person he came to was Kizaru, who had just condensed his body. Kizaru thought, "Oh shit," he held the Tian Kong Yun sword and slashed down. However, Zephyr's ability to see and hear was also top-notch. Kizaru was stunned for a long time but couldn't hit Zephyr. In the end, Jie used Kamui to rush over and help him out. Jie summoned the demon sword Muramasa and fought directly with Zephyr. The 2 men's figures flickered on the field, and wherever they passed, the ground cracked. The more Zephyr fights, the happier he becomes. Jie can fight him to this extent, which shows that Jie is now fully capable of taking charge on his own. His family had been killed by pirates, and as a teacher, there was nothing more gratifying than seeing his students achieve something. Everyone watching the game was completely dumbfounded, because Jiji's fighting power completely exceeded their imagination. You must know that he is only 18 years old this year. An 18-year-old young Marine actually fought against the long-famous Marine Admiral Zephyr to such an extent. Just for this reason, the outcome of the battle was no longer that important. On the high platform, Sengoku also looked shocked and said, "It's unbelievable. Jiji's growth rate is really amazing." He looked intently at Jie and Zephyr who were fighting together on the field, and said in a deep voice, "Marshal Kong, we should renegotiate Jiji's status after graduation." Sora, who was sitting in the middle, nodded slightly, looking thoughtful. On the field, Kizaru had already flown high into the sky, crossed his arms, and condensed 2 shining balls of light in his hands. He locked onto Zephyr and shouted, "Yashikani no Magatama." In a dazzling halo, countless light bullets fell like raindrops, all rushing towards Zephyr below. Jie, who was fighting with Zephyr, immediately activated Kamui. Zephyr punched into the air and was then drowned by the rain of light. The power of each light bullet was even more violent than the shells on the warship. The explosions sounded one after another, raising a large cloud of dust on the ground, making it difficult to see the scene in the field for a while. Swish! Kizaru dispersed the light and fell to the ground with a tumble. Akainu took a step forward, raised his arms after elementalization, and blasted a wave of magma fists into the sky. Then, after the light rain, people were lucky enough to see another wave of magma rain. Meteor volcano. The hot lava fists with terrifying impact force fell from the sky, all hitting the position where Jige and Zephyr were just now. People who didn't know Jige's ability saw this natural disaster-like attack and were worried about Jige, who was still inside. However, when the dust and smoke cleared, they saw the two people inside and were stunned again. Zephyr's upper body clothes had disappeared, revealing his strong muscles, but some burns and flashing marks could still be seen on his body. Jige looked no different from before, and the reporters were all horrified, thinking what kind of defense this was. Zephyr shook his body, turned his head to look at Jige, and suddenly found that Jige's body had begun to light up white. His pupils shrank, and he immediately crossed his arms to protect his chest, and his figure flashed and retreated. The next second, Jige's voice sounded. Shinra Tensai. Buzz. The terrifying repulsive force swept out, and a hemispherical transparent repulsive force field was instantly generated on the field, and the ground was washed clean by the repulsive force. Zephyr himself was rushed to the side of the field. He still maintained a defensive posture, his body trembled slightly, and in the shocked eyes of everyone, he spit out a mouthful of blood. Wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth, Zephyr smiled and said, "Not bad, your move is still powerful enough." Not far away, countless light points gathered into Kizaru's body, and the ground next to him suddenly cracked, and a thick pillar of magma gushed out from it, and Akainu walked out of the magma. This highlights the benefits of elementalization. No matter how strong your physical fitness is and how fast you are, you have to take on the extremely destructive and wide-ranging moves like Shinra Tensai. Light, an invisible element, is more convenient. Kizaru only needs to stand still. At most, he will be temporarily dispersed and it will take some time to condense his body. Akainu was a little more troublesome. In order to avoid being blown out of the field by the repulsive force, he had to choose to sink into the ground and temporarily avoid the impact of the repulsive force. Zephyr moved his body, and his slightly disordered breathing caused by the repulsive force calmed down. Then, he locked his eyes on Kizaru. Chapter 91. Noticing Zephyr's gaze, Kizaru couldn't help but shudder, and subconsciously wanted to elementalize and get out of the way. Zephyr had already arrived in front of him and punched out. Kizaru had to block with his arms first, but was still knocked backwards. Akainu released a large amount of magma and rushed towards Zephyr, but Zephyr dodged to avoid it. When Zephyr got serious, he was a completely different person than before, and his admiral-level physical skills were fully displayed. The unlucky Kizaru was his first target. He received several old punches from Zephyr. In the process, he shot several laser beams with his fingers, but Zephyr avoided them every time and even managed to hit Kizaru again. One punch. Upon seeing this, Akainu immediately transformed his lower body into an elemental form, and rushed over with the help of the explosive power of the magma. On the way, his magma arm quickly extended and enlarged, turning into a lava dog head and biting Zephyr. Dog bites Gurren. The attack power of lava fruit is no joke. Zephyr temporarily gave up on Kizaru, who was bruised and swollen, and wanted to avoid the attack again with his body skills. But the lava doghead did not dissipate after being thrown into the air. Instead, it turned around and chased Zephyr. Seeing that he could not dodge, Zephyr immediately attacked Akainu's body. Akainu shouted angrily and pulled back his thrown arm. His whole body turned into crystal red, and he punched the oncoming Zephyr with his red fist. Dark Hound. Since Whitebeard, Akainu has been practicing for nearly 2 years, and his strength has increased significantly. If Odin dares to take such a hit now, even if he uses 2 swords to resist, the result will definitely not be as simple as being knocked away. Dark Hound can be said to have brought the terrifying high temperature and explosive power of lava fruit to the ultimate. Even Zephyr did not dare to catch it with his fists. The moment he was about to touch the magma, he immediately released his weapon color and blasted out a blast. Powerful shock wave. There was a roar that resounded across the sky, and Akainu rushed in with all his strength, and collided with Zephyr's fist. Zephyr felt a sharp pain in his fist. The muscles on his arm bulged, and the weapon color on his fist flashed a metallic luster. With a loud shout, he knocked Akainu away with one punch. Akainu fell heavily to the ground. He gritted his teeth, covered one arm and struggled to get up. Zephyr slowly retracted his trembling arm. He raised his hand and took a look, only to see that the skin on the back of his hand had been burned. It was red and there were a few blisters. At this moment, a dark vortex emerged from his side, and Jige stabbed out with the demon sword Muramasa. Zephyr ignored his injured hand and turned sideways to avoid it, but his body suddenly fell. Zephyr glanced at his feet with his peripheral vision. The ground had turned into a dark swamp, and the gravity emanating from it pulled his feet down. Jige looked serious and shouted in a low voice, "Teacher Zephyr, take care of your feet, let's get buried in the dark waterfall." In fact, Jige didn't need to remind him that Zephyr had already covered his feet with armed colors, but when the dark power erupted, he couldn't help but groan. Then he jumped up and forced his feet out of the darkness, but when he landed, he swayed obviously before he stabilized his body. Zephyr frowned, his foot bone cracked. What he didn't know was that Odin was even worse at that time, as he lost a calf to this combo. Of course, with Zephyr's battle-hardened willpower, he won't care about this injury, but it will have a certain impact on his speed. Kizaru and Akainu came to Jige's side. Both of them were a little sluggish, and it would be difficult to launch an effective attack on Zephyr in a short period of time. Now only Jige is left to face Zephyr alone. Akainu wanted to continue but was stopped by Jige. Jige whispered, "You guys take a break first and leave the rest to me." After saying that, Jige's body twisted and disappeared, and emerged from above Zephyr. Zephyr was already on guard, and he threw an uppercut the moment Jige appeared. Jige folded his palms on his abdomen, and darkness poured out from the back of his right hand, turning into 7 sharp knife-shaped spikes, stabbing Zephyr together. Zephyr squatted down slightly, covering his body with armor, and shouted in a low voice, "Armed iron body." The 7 blades of darkness pierced Zephyr's body with a clanging sound, leaving no more than 7 holes on Zephyr's skin. Jige was stunned for a moment, and complained in his heart that iron body is indeed something that everyone can use. However, the students watching around should not be superstitious about this trick, otherwise they will suffer a loss sooner or later. Zephyr's mastery of the 6 postures has reached a level of proficiency. Iron body's sending and receiving are all in one thought. The next second, he rains down heavy punches again, but they are all dodged by Jige's Kamui. "Your iron body is indeed awesome, but my Kamui is just a scumbag." Zephyr also felt helpless against Jige's move. Unless Jige took the initiative to attack, there was really nothing he could do against Jige. Crack! Suddenly, Jige lifted Kamui, lightning flashed across his body, and he punched Zephyr. Feeling the power of Jige's punch, a look of surprise appeared in Zephyr's eyes, and he said, "Huh, your strength seems to have increased a lot. Did you still hold back on the teacher just now?" Jige smiled slightly and responded, "How dare I hold back my hands in front of the teacher? I just used electricity to stimulate my body." Under the stimulation of electricity, Jige's strength and speed were increased, and most importantly, his pain was reduced to the lowest point. This means that he can ignore dark fruits, double pain, debuff and safely engage in close combat with Zephyr. Of course, not everyone can use electricity to strengthen their body. Jige's physique is strong enough, and ordinary people would have been paralyzed by electricity. After hearing this, a look of admiration appeared on Zephyr's face. Electric discharge is Jige's own ability, which is completely in line with the philosophy he admires. Even if Jige is not a dark fruit user, his physical ability alone is not comparable to that of the average vice admiral. However, appreciation is appreciation. Zephyr's fist did not become less powerful because of this, but became more violent. Jige tore his shirt to pieces, revealing his muscular body, and engaged in a wave of macho blows with Zephyr. The two of them were like two beasts. Every fist collision was accompanied by a deafening roar. The ground where they were located was constantly collapsing, and the area was still expanding. Above the high platform, Sengoku and Garp, who had always been calm, stared in shock at the battle below. Even Marshal Sora crushed the armrests of his chair and shouted, "Wonderful!" On the court, Jige and Zephyr punched each other fiercely, and then each retreated to the sidelines. At this time, the venue had been completely destroyed by the battle between the two. Large craters and scorch marks caused by electricity could be seen everywhere. Ji took a deep breath and relaxed his muscles a little. Fighting against an admiral-level taijutsu master like Zephyr was refreshing, but the load on his body was still quite heavy. Zephyr touched his fists with a cheerful expression on his face. He didn't give Ji much time to rest and rushed out again regardless of his foot injury. However, he was stopped midway by Akainu and Kizaru. Both of them recovered some fighting power, and each used their abilities to blast Zephyr indiscriminately. The laser lava poured out as if it was costless. Zephyr avoided whatever he could. If he couldn't avoid it, he used his fists to clear the way. He rushed forward with all his strength. Kizaru knew that he was Zephyr's priority, so he turned into photons and flew high into the sky. With all his strength, he fired another 8-foot Magatama shot. He really showed great strength today. Even Zephyr was surprised. He said while resisting the light bullet. "That's right, Porosalino. What the teacher wants to see most is your serious look now." Hearing Zephyr praise himself for the first time, Kizaru felt his whole body tense up, and then he released larger and denser light bombs. Akainu was also unambiguous. He directly transformed into a magma mage, standing in the distance and blasting magma punches like cannonballs at Zephyr. Aha! Ji appeared next to Akainu. He locked his eyes on Zephyr, who was bathed in lasers and lava. Circles of black halo appeared on his right arm. Then, he raised his arms high, and the dark halo shot straight into the sky, and finally disappeared into the clouds. After doing all this, Ji released another torrent of darkness and swept towards Zephyr. The three major Logias were firing on all cylinders, and Zephyr was not invincible either. The Iron Fist fight with Ji just now consumed a lot of his energy. Moreover, light and dark magma are extremely strong elements, especially the darkness of Ji. Zephyr uses most of its power to resist the gravity of darkness. Once dragged into a part of the darkness, even with Zephyr's armament strength, he will have to avoid damage. If the area is too large, everyone will be completely defeated. Now Zephyr can only wait for Ji and the three of them to run out of energy, and then rush out to finish them off one by one. Zephyr's combat experience is indeed not limited. In fact, Ji and the three of them continued to output such high-power elemental attacks after a fierce battle, and their physical strength was already very exhausted. But think about it from another angle. In the end, a Marine Admiral versus Ji had to rely on physical strength to decide the outcome. This is already an extremely outrageous thing. Kizaru's face looked pale. He had really drained himself dry. Just when he couldn't hold it any longer, Ji below suddenly shouted. "That's enough. Porosalino, you can come down now." Hearing these words, Kizaru suddenly felt his body soften and almost fell from the sky. He used his last strength to use the Yata mirror to return to Ji and Akainu. He pressed Akainu's shoulder with one hand and gasped for air. In fact, Akainu was almost exhausted from exhaustion, but he still straightened his shoulders to make Kizaru more stable. After the two stopped fighting, the only elemental attack Zephyr had to fight against was the darkness released by Ji. He charged up and jumped, using Moonwalk to stay in the air. Looking down at the three Ji people below, Zephyr nodded with satisfaction. It seemed to him that the battle was over. He was about to conclude a few words, but found that the surroundings suddenly darkened, and the audience below also raised their heads. A dull look. Zephyr turned around suddenly, and when he saw the scene above, his pupils suddenly shrank. "I saw that a giant meteorite that was so large that it almost covered the entire site had broken through the clouds and was falling rapidly downwards. What's even worse is that the meteorite is still burning with flames." Ji raised his hand again, and a dark vortex appeared in his palm. He pulled hard out of the air, and the meteorite accelerated again under the pull of gravity. Ji shouted, "Tengai Shinsei." Zephyr came back from the shock. He mobilized the strength of his whole body and concentrated all his armament on his fists. He roared angrily and punched out with both fists. After the meteorite approached, when viewed from below, Zephyr had turned into a black dot in front of the meteorite. His fist hit the meteorite, and an explosion resounded throughout the world. Then a strong airflow exploded, and the scattered meteorite fragments formed an even more powerful meteor volcano. The meteorite pulled down by Ji was much larger than Fujitora's. Zephyr, whose physical strength was severely reduced, could not smash such a large meteorite with one blow. He had to punch several times in succession before he could completely destroy the meteorite. Zephyr dragged his exhausted body back to the ground, looked up at Jijie, and said helplessly, Jijie, you really gave the teacher a heavyweight gift. Jijie smiled, and the demon sword Muramasa flew out from the back of his hand and surrounded him. Zephyr waved his hand upon seeing this and said, if we don't fight anymore, your strength is enough to reassure the teacher. As soon as these words came out, Jijie and Akainu were fine, and Kizaru just sat down on the ground. He just wanted to find a bed and have a good sleep. In the past, Zephyr would have given Kizaru a slap in the face when he saw him looking like this, but now he chuckled, shook his head, and said, Porosalino, you. Kizaru put his hands on the ground, raised his head and said, okay, Teacher Zephyr, I've graduated, so please stop talking about me. Zephyr patted the dust on his body and said, you're right, you have graduated. Time flies so fast, and I am getting old too. Teacher Zephyr, I admit that I often call you old man, but I never think you are old. Good boy, have you ever called me old man? Quote. Only then did Kizaru realize that he had slipped his words, so he moved his butt and hid behind Jijie and Akainu. Jijie said hello to the bear, and the bear immediately came over and popped out pain bubbles one by one. Kizaru stood up from the ground with a look of ecstasy on his face. After twisting his butt, he let out a comfortable moan. Zephyr finally couldn't stand it any longer and went up to him and kicked him on the butt. He laughed and cursed. It's never straight. Kizaru covered his butt and jumped away. Zephyr stopped paying attention to him. He took a deep look at Jijie and the three of them and said, okay, teacher, I have completed my final mission. Marine's future depends on you. After the battle, with everyone watching in awe, Zephyr and Jijie returned to the high platform. The generals looked at Jijie differently. It was obvious that Jijie was younger than everyone here, but from today on, no one would treat them as juniors anymore. It can be said that everyone who watched today's battle had the same idea in their hearts, that is, the three of Jijie are already the confirmed three admirals in the future. In their opinion, the battle just now should be considered a draw, but how old are the three Jijie? The position of Marine Admiral seems to have been prepared for them. Soldiers have already sent 3 brand new marine cloaks, which are obviously for Jijie and the 3 of them. The epaulets in 3 colors, black, yellow and red, clearly show the rank of Vice Admiral. After Jijie put it on, they stood at the front of the high platform at the signal of Marshal Kong. Sora looked down at the crowd below and announced loudly, based on the outstanding performance of the 3 Jijie in the assessment, the headquarters has decided to award the 3 of them the rank of Vice Admiral. As soon as he finished speaking, a burst of excited shouts erupted from below. Whether among pirates or marines, strength is valued, and the strength of Jijie and the 3 of them has conquered everyone present. Every scene of the dazzling flash, boiling magma and endless darkness left a deep imprint on the hearts of these people. Of course, Jijie's performance is the most eye-catching. During the battle, Jijie demonstrated physical skills, swordsmanship, hockey, and fruit abilities. Each level was beyond the reach of everyone present. The 18-year-old Marine had no shortcomings at all. Marine executives also knew this deeply, so they waited for the crowd below to gradually quiet down before dropping another bombshell. Among the 3, I believe that Jijie's strength has been seen by everyone, so I have listed him as an admiral candidate and hereby announce it. Kong said it loudly, but compared to just now, it seemed unusually quiet down there this time. Jijie himself did not expect that he would be promoted so quickly, and the headquarters would directly assign him the status of an admiral candidate. Although the admiral candidate is not a formal military rank, the status of a vice admiral is unmatched by other vice admirals. What's more, Jijie is currently the only admiral candidate in Marine, and Momoshiki and Otaku, who seem to be forced to come up behind him, can't compare with him. Kong suddenly turned around and asked Jijie, Jijie, the decision to list you as an admiral candidate is just made by the headquarters. Although you are not yet an admiral, you should have a code name. Think about it when you go back. However, Jijie only thought for a moment and came up with his code name. Marshal Kong, I have already thought about it. My code name is Black Dragon. Black is naturally the most suitable for his abilities, and dragon is related to his identity because he is a celestial dragon. Kong nodded after hearing this. As long as the code name was not too outrageous, he didn't care about this kind of thing. He immediately announced GGE's code name to the bottom, Admiral Alternate, Black Dragon. Garp was in a daze after hearing this code name. He couldn't help but think that if his son also became a Marine Admiral in the future, the code name must be related to dragons. Long fixedly looked up at GJ, who was attracting everyone's attention. He didn't know how long he would have to look like this, maybe for a lifetime. He was in a disturbed mood, and it wasn't until GJ and the others walked off the platform and were surrounded by people that he was called back by a burst of congratulations. Ginny hung on GJ and shouted happily, "Brother GJ, you are already an admiral, Black Dragon Admiral." GJ touched the stupid pink hair on her head and said with a smile, "Not yet an admiral, just a candidate for admiral. Admiral candidate only." GGE's truth caused 10,000 real harm to all the students, and even Akainu's mouth twitched. In the evening, the Marine School cafeteria prepared a sumptuous banquet for all students, because after tonight, a group of people will leave the school. On a table in the center, Zephyr sits at the head, GJ and Akainu sit on the left and right, and Kizaru sits on the right of Akainu. Zephyr has given special permission to drink tonight. After the food was served, everyone in the cafeteria hall, both men and women, raised their glasses together and drank the wine in one gulp. After putting down the wine glass, Kizaru reached out and pulled out a banana from the fruit bowl. He has grown very fast in the past few years. A banana is too small for him, so he can just take a bite of it. GJ, Zephyr and Akainu were eating and chatting. While they were eating, Ginny came over with a blushing face, pulled GJ up and said, "Brother GJ, come and sit at our girls' table." Ginny also drank wine, her pretty face was flushed, and she looked very cute. GJ glanced at Zephyr, and Zephyr smiled and nodded, waving his hand and saying, "Go ahead, the female classmates like you very much." Zephyr has become more relaxed today. After drinking a few large glasses of wine, he speaks much more casually, which is in sharp contrast to his previous image of a strict teacher. Ginny made a face, pulled GJ and trotted all the way to the table where she was. Lucia and Guillaume were also at this table. GJ glanced at it and asked, "Ginny, where is your good friend Jessica?" Ginny moved a chair next to her. After GJ sat down, she hugged GGE's arm and hummed. "Jessica went to the kitchen to help. She cooked a lot of the dishes we had today." GJ nodded after hearing this, thinking no wonder some of the dishes were particularly delicious today. It must have been cooked by Jessica, as her cooking skills are indeed good. Just as she was thinking about it, Lucia poured a glass of red wine and pushed it in front of GJ. GJ picked it up and drank it in one gulp. Just as she put the glass down, Jessica came back from the kitchen. She glanced at GJ sitting at the table in surprise, took off her apron and found a seat to sit down. GJ immediately praised, "Jessica, the food you cook is really delicious. Come on my boat after graduation." Jessica was stunned for a moment, she lowered her head in embarrassment and said coquettishly, Okay, well, then it's settled, you will be the chef on my ship from now on." When GJ made such a decision, the female students at the table all looked astonished, and then they all looked at Jessica, who had her head lowered, with envy. Everyone knows that GJ became the vice admiral of the headquarters after graduation, and also held the title of admiral candidate. Not everyone can be the chief chef on his warship, at least he must be at the rank of major. After Jessica graduated, she was just an ensign at most, and GJ directly gave her a position with school-level salary. At this moment, all the girls looked at GJ with more and more enthusiasm. Some girls no longer cared about being reserved, got up and gathered around GJ. Lucia calmly approached GJ, Ginny occupied the position in GGE's arms, and Guillaume used her strength to squeeze into the remaining side of GJ. When the male students at the other tables saw GJ surrounded by stars, they all smacked their lips and drank heavily. They are convinced of GJ, and ask themselves, if they were girls, they would probably take the initiative against GJ. After all, GJ wants to be good-looking and strong. How could she not be tempted by that girl? GJ always has a polite smile on his face, and he is willing to accept toasts. Just kidding, he has dark fruit ability, his body is darkness, and absorbing some alcohol is completely childish. He only really drank the wine Lucia and Ginny poured. It's just that Ginny's drinking capacity was really bad. After a while, she drank so much that she collapsed in Gigi's arms, talking nonsense in a daze. But even when she was talking nonsense, she couldn't get away from Gigi in 8 out of 10 sentences. Lucia, on the other hand, has a surprisingly good capacity for drinking. She is gentle and quiet from beginning to end, and even picks up Gigi's dishes from time to time. After the dinner, Gigi sent Ginny to the door of the dormitory, watched Jessica help her into the dormitory building, and then turned around and left. After taking a few steps, Gigi suddenly stopped. He turned around, looked at Lucia who was following him and asked, "Lucia, why don't you go back?" Lucia smoothed her long black hair and said softly, "Young master, I want to go for a walk with you, is that okay?" After speaking, she lowered her head and murmured, "It's been a long time since I've been alone with the young master." When Gigi heard this, he immediately took Lucia's hand and whispered, "What's wrong? They just happened to have returned to their dormitories. Let's go sit on the training ground for a while." A bright smile immediately broke out on Lucia's face. She took Gigi's arm and walked towards the training ground together. Upstairs, Guillaume held his chin and looked at the backs of Gigi and Lucia quietly. Jessica covered Ginny with the quilt and asked casually, "Guillaume, what are you looking at?" Guillaume shook his head, turned around and said with a smile, "It's nothing. It's getting late and we should rest." "Well, I didn't expect Ginny's drinking ability to be so bad. We can't let her drink in the future." Guillaume glanced at Ginny who was sleeping soundly and said softly, "Yeah, she really should drink less. ... At the training ground, beside a thick tree, Lucia sat on her knees on the ground, with Gigi resting on her thigh. Lucia caressed Gigi's face, her eyes full of tenderness. Gigi closed his eyes, enjoying Lucia's knee pillow and said, "Lucia, you will be my adjutant from now on. It all depends on the arrangements of the young master. I am your slave. Here we go again, I have never treated you as a slave. When I was a child, I treated you as my sister. Now." Speaking of this, Gigi opened his eyes, looked at Lucia, and said word by word, "Now you are my woman." Lucia's face suddenly turned red. She didn't dare to look into Gigi's eyes and wanted to turn her head away, but Gigi suddenly stood up and their faces were almost touching each other. Looking at each other, Gigi asked softly, "What, do you think there's something wrong with what I said?" After saying that, without waiting for Lucia to respond, Gigi directly kissed Lucia's seductive red lips, and with a little force, pushed Lucia down. After a brief absence, Lucia immediately began to respond actively and enthusiastically. A pair of her pupils had unconsciously turned into a magical purple. This was the first time that she had triggered her ability unconsciously. Then, she spread out a pair of dark wings and wrapped herself and Gigi inside. Under the moonlight, the black feathers on Lucia's wings trembled slightly, creating a moving wave. After a while, a painful groan came from the wings, followed by another suppressed but moving tone. I don't know how long it took, but the trembling of the feathers gradually slowed down. After a trembling sound, it slowly opened, revealing Gigi and Lucia inside. Gigi was topless, and Lucia's clothes were just casually draped over her body. A happy smile spread across her pretty face, and she rubbed gently against Gigi's strong chest. Looking at Lucia lying in his arms like a kitten, Gigi joked, "The angel has really fallen now." Lucia fluttered her long eyelashes, tilted her head and said, "Young master, I was originally a fallen angel, but I don't think this is a fall. To me just now, it should have been like I returned to heaven." Gigi was amused by Lucia's words. He lowered his head and kissed Lucia's smooth forehead. Then he summoned the dark Bible, folded a white handkerchief and put it into the Bible. Lucia's face turned red again. She suddenly buried her face in Gigi's arms and said in a low voice, "Young master, how can you put that thing in the Bible? Will we go to hell after death?" Gigi curled his lips and said, "What are you talking about? I don't think anything is more holy than that. And why do we die? Don't you want to stay with me forever?" Lucia suddenly stood up from Gigi's arms when she heard the last sentence. She hugged Gigi's neck, looked into Gigi's eyes, and said softly, "Of course Lucia will always be with the young master. Even if I go to hell, I will still be with the young master. Jie smiled and said, won't go to hell. Then I will follow the young master to heaven. We won't go to any kind of heaven. These are things we should consider after death, so we never have to think about this. Jie, who has the memory of Blue Star, knows that there is more than one way to make people immortal in the pirate world. If this is the case, then the dog belt thing will never happen to him and his loved ones. However, Jie didn't explain much about this. He held Lucia and leaned against the tree trunk. He reached into his trouser pocket with one hand and took out a pack of cigarettes, which Zephyr gave to him after he drank too much at the dinner. Now was the perfect time to smoke one. He stretched out a finger, a flash of lightning flashed across the cigarette, and he lit the cigarette. He took a deep breath and blew out a heart-shaped smoke ring. Lucia reached out and poked it, and the smoke ring drifted along her arm, and finally dispersed in the wind. Under the moonlight, the two cuddled together quietly. Lucia looked up at Gigi's side face, hoping that time could freeze at this moment forever. An 18-year-old admiral candidate appeared in the marine. In just a few days, with the desperate work of a large number of news birds, the news spread almost all over the ocean. This is definitely not good news for the pirate forces. On the Moby Dick, Whitebeard was having a party with his sons. Someone brought in the newly received newspaper. Whitebeard just glanced at it and immediately crushed the barrel in his hand. It's this marine kid named Jie again. Fighting with Zephyr. Stop joking. Hearing Gigi's name, the atmosphere of the party stagnated instantly. Odin sat on the side of Whitebeard. He stared at the photo of Jie in the newspaper, his eyes full of hatred. He touched the empty sleeve on his left side and said in a hateful voice, Beiji, our Whitebeard pirates must take revenge. Whitebeard glanced at him and said, Odin, of course we will take revenge, but you should pay more attention to Xiao Xiao now, she is about to give birth. Hearing this, Odin's anger was slightly calmed down, he nodded and said nothing more. Whitebeard spread the newspaper on the table and said lightly, Marine is promoting supernovas so loudly, just to suppress us pirates, haha, monster newcomers are not just theirs. Odin was stunned for a moment and asked, Beiji, what do you mean? Pirates can also push out a few so-called supernovas, and our Whitebeard pirates have two of them, you and Marco. Odin is now 31 years old, the same age as Drake when he became a supernova later. With the influence of the Whitebeard pirates, when the news of the pirate supernova was released, the newspapers immediately buzzed with excitement like flies smelling something. A pirate supernova with only 2 people is definitely not a good idea, but the pirates don't need to worry about this. The newspapers directly selected 5 powerful pirates based on the news in the past 2 years and stuffed them into the pirate supernova team. The Beasts pirates were established, and Kaido, who was jumping around everywhere, was among them. Moreover, their pirate group was quite impressive. In addition to him as the captain, there was also the second person on the ship, Jin. However, Kaido was so angry when he saw the news that he wanted to smash the reporter who stuffed him into the supernova to death with a stick. Jin asked in confusion, Boss, you don't look happy. Kaido raised his head and took a few gulps of strong liquor, and said angrily, Humph. I'm really tired of being a newcomer. Lousy doesn't care about supernovas. He grabbed the newspaper and wanted to tear it up, but suddenly saw the news about the ant. It turned out that her second son, Charlotte Katakuri, was also selected as a supernova. Kaido suddenly became a little happy again and muttered, giving birth to so many children and only one was selected. It's a bit embarrassing, Linlin. Looking at the remaining 2 supernovas, both are spirited guys, one is called Moria and the other is called Crocodile. Kaido has no interest in these 2 people, just looking at Moria's photo and complaining, this kid looks a bit ugly, I want to give him a stick. Naval Headquarters. After that night, GGE's class of students still live in the school dormitory for the time being, waiting for the arrangement of the headquarters. When they have nothing to do, these veteran students will go to the training ground to watch the newcomers training, and give a few words of guidance from time to time, experiencing the superiority of the old people. Lucia is still inseparable from Jie. She often goes out to find Jie at night to do something she likes, and does not come back until late at night. One time, when Lucia came back, she met Ginny who was up late at night. She had a rare look of panic on her face, which was always aloof. At the same time, there was an indescribable feeling in her heart, which was exciting and shameful. Ginny tilted her head, looked at Lucia's slightly messy clothes, and asked, "Lucia, did you go out at night? Can't you sleep?" Lucia pursed her lips and said in a low voice, After a ha-ha, Ginny patted Lucia on the shoulder and said, "Girls who suffer from insomnia are bad for their skin. Go back to sleep quickly. Brother GGE's warship will be approved in the next 2 days, and we will be on the same ship with him." Lucia nodded, feeling indescribably weird. A boat was still too big for her, and a bed was enough. Guillaume got up when she heard the noise. She was wearing a pink silk pajamas, leaning on the bed, looking at the two people at the door with a half smile. When Ginny saw Guillaume also getting up, she thought she had been awakened by her conversation with Lucia, and immediately apologized. "I'm sorry, Guillaume, I disturbed you for taking a rest." After 2 years of getting along, the gap between Ginny and Guillaume has long since disappeared, and Ginny's character is not one to hold grudges. Guillaume smiled and said softly, "It's okay. I've been sleeping lightly these past few days and often can't fall asleep." Lucia frowned slightly. She had indeed been too relaxed these days. Guillaume's words obviously meant something, and he most likely knew that she went out in the middle of the night. But one thing is certain, that is, it is impossible for Guillaume to see what she and the young master are doing, and it is impossible for her to avoid the young master's perception of the love. Thinking of this, Lucia felt a lot more at ease. She pretended not to hear, silently went back to her bed and lay down, said goodnight and closed her eyes. Guillaume shrugged. Ginny glanced at the two of them inexplicably, then looked at Jessica who was still sleeping, and muttered, "Everyone is so weird." The next day, the headquarters approved warships for all cadets who graduated with military ranks of Commodore level and above. As a Commodore, Lucia can naturally have her own warship, but she chose to become GGE's adjutant and be on the same ship with GJ. Ginny and Jessica also boarded GGE's boat. GJ, Akainu, and Kazaru were assigned to the G1, G2, and G3 branches respectively as base leaders there. These 3 branches are all located in the Grand Line and are not at the same level as the Marine branches in the 4 sea areas. These 3 branches are also located in sea areas with extremely difficult security. In recent years, Overlord-level pirate forces have often appeared here. Among them, the G1 branch where GJ is located is the most important. It uses the red line as the axis of symmetry and is symmetrical with the headquarters. It can be said to be the strongest line of defense behind the headquarters. During wartime, we can support the headquarters in the shortest possible time. The headquarters handed over the position of base director of the G1 branch to GJ, which shows that it highly recognizes his strength. In the port of the headquarters, GJ stood on the bow of the warship, with Ginny and Lucia standing beside him. With a loud whistle, the warship slowly sailed out of Marineford. Zephyr took a bottle of sherry and took a sip, humming a song called Island, the music of Zephyr's final battle in the theater version. The world has been watching. 1 year later, Grand Line, G1 branch. The steel warship slowly docked at the dock, and a large number of Marine soldiers disembarked from the warship. They lined up in 2 teams with solemn faces, forming a passage. Then, a tall man wearing a marine cloak slowly walked over, with 2 slim figures behind him. The flying squirrel had been waiting at the port for a long time. When he saw the tall man leading him, he immediately stepped forward and gave a military salute and said, "GJ Vice Admiral." The person coming was none other than GJ, and those behind him were naturally Ginny and Lucia. Today's GJ looks taller and stronger, and his whole person exudes a restrained haughty. He wore a pair of black gloves, and the marine cloak he wore, the epaulets and cuffs were all pure black. Raising his head and smiling at the flying squirrel, GJ raised his hand and released a large cloud of black mist, from which bloody human heads fell to the ground. The flying squirrel swallowed. He knew that these were a pirate group that had just broken into this sea area not long ago, called the Tattered Cat Pirates. Its captain, Guy Turan, has a bounty of 120 million belly. It is Zone cat fruit Persian cat form. Although he is just an ordinary species in Zone, Guy Turan has awakened the knowledge color and the weapon color, and the strength is not low. Coupled with the increase of the Zone fruit on the body, he can be regarded as a strong person. However, She was also swollen, and after arriving at the Grand Line, she actually broke into the sea area guarded by Ji. When Ji heard that she was demon fruit power, she directly led the fleet to destroy her. The heads on the ground were all members of the tattered cat pirates, and their bodies had been minced by the darkness. Ji left the heads so that the people below could count them when he came back. Among the large number of heads on the ground, a female head with long blonde hair and a beautiful face stood out very conspicuously. Her face still maintained a look of fear, her broken neck had a smooth cut surface, and there was a black hole in the center of her forehead, entrance of the cave. Ji pointed at the head and said, "Flying Squirrel, this is Gai Trin, the captain of the Tabby Cat Pirates. She was killed by Lucia and Ginny. Please indicate this when reporting to the headquarters." After the cat pirates encountered the fleet led by Ji, everyone on board was pulled high into the sky by a terrifying gravity and then was instantly swallowed by darkness. Only the frightened Gai Turan fell on the deck of the warship. Ji deliberately kept her not because she was beautiful, but just because she was demon fruit power. And Ji just wanted to test the abilities he had just developed. When he stretched out a darkened hand to Gai Turan was so frightened that she immediately knelt on the ground and desperately begged Ji for mercy. In extreme fear, she even took off her scarce clothes, trying to save his life with his body. However, her behavior angered Lucia and Ginny. With one knife and one shot, Gai Turan's head became what it is now on the ground. Ji took advantage of the heat to test his abilities, and the effect was just as he expected. Returning to his base commander's office, Ji summoned the Dark Bible, and a purple apple-shaped devil fruit flew out of it. He took the devil fruit and tossed it in his hand, looked at Lucia and Ginny in front of him, and asked Ginny with a smile, "Ginny, are you interested in eating this Persian cat fruit?" Ginny shook her head with disgust and said, "Brother Ji, that woman's fruit is too dirty, I don't want to eat it." The reason why she said this was because when she discovered Gai Trin's pirate ship, she first used a telescope to observe the situation on the ship from a distance. As a result, I saw Gai Turan holding a special party on the ship, and he was still in the half-animal form of the Persian cat fruit. The visual impact of this scene on Ginny was so strong that she still blushed with embarrassment when she thought about it, and she didn't even think about why Gai Turan's devil fruit appeared in Gigi's hands. And this seems extremely outrageous to people with some common sense about devil fruit. Lucia looked at the devil fruit in Gigi's hand, with shock in her eyes, and couldn't help but ask, "Young master, isn't this the fruit of Gai Turan? How could it be?" Ji has already told Ginny Lucia's identity, so Lucia no longer has to avoid addressing the issue when there are only 3 people present. Ginny asked belatedly after hearing Lucia's words, "That's right, brother Ji, won't devil fruit be reborn randomly somewhere in the world after a person with abilities dies? Could it be that it was reborn in your hand? This is too much of a coincidence." Ji smiled and shook his head and said, "How can there be such a coincidence? Look at this." With a thought, the Dark Bible opened, and a large number of fruits emerged from it, including apples, bananas, and pineapples. Lucia looked at the fruits on the table and said suddenly, "I understand, young master. Devil fruit will attach its ability to the fruit, so you prepare the fruit in advance so that after the person with the ability dies, devil fruit can find the carrier of the ability as soon as possible." But after she finished speaking, she felt that it was not that simple. If you wanted to get the devil fruit of a dead person with abilities just by preparing the fruit in advance, then such a simple method would have been spread around the world long ago. Gigi's next words also confirmed this. "Lucia, you only guessed half of it right. If you want to truly obtain the devil fruit of a dead Esper, this is the key." As he spoke, Ji stretched out a darkened hand. This was not the first time Lucia had seen dark fruit's ability, but this time she felt a deep palpitation when looking at Gigi's hand exuding darkness. It felt like something in the body was about to be pulled out by the darkness. But Ginny, who was standing next to Lucia, didn't feel this way. When Ji saw the uncomfortable look on Lucia's face, he immediately dispersed the darkness in his hands and said, "This is an ability that I recently developed. When the person with the ability dies, I can manipulate the power of darkness to bind the devil fruit that has not yet escaped from the body, and then guide it into the prepared fruit. I named it Dark God." GJ said it in an understatement, but after hearing this, Lucia and Ginny's pupils shrank, and a look of horror appeared on their faces. This can be said to completely break the world's understanding of devil fruit. GJ is equivalent to realizing the certainty given by devil fruit's ability. And the person who masters this ability is GJ. With his strength, he can create a powerful army of ability users at any time as long as he wants. GJ sucked the Persian cat fruit into the Dark Bible. The fruit's ability is indeed average and can only be used as a collection for the time being. Lucia and Ginny were still in a daze, their expressions looked very cute. GJ chuckled and was about to speak when the phone on the table suddenly rang. GJ was stunned for a moment. After answering the phone, Kong's serious voice sounded. GJ, you go back to Naval Headquarters immediately. Don't take the warship. Use your ability. The sooner the better. Sora obviously meant that something big had happened. GJ didn't waste any time and just said one word. Then he hung up the phone, got up and said to Lucia and Ginny, I'll go back to headquarters first. Just wait for me at the base. The two women nodded, and Lucia said softly, Young master, just leave this place to us. Don't worry. Ginny said with a concerned look on her face. Brother GJ, if there are any dangerous tasks in our headquarters, you must be careful. GJ stepped forward, took the two girls into his arms, and said softly, Don't be nervous. If anything happens, I will tell you in advance. After saying that, GJ used Kamui directly, twisted his body and disappeared into the darkness. Marineford. In the Marshal's empty office, after Garp once again refused to be promoted to Admiral, he turned around and wanted to leave hurriedly, as if there was something urgent. At this time, there was a knock on the door, and Garp opened it. Standing outside the door was GJ. Seeing GJ, Garp was stunned for a moment and said, GJ, why are you back? GJ smiled politely, and before he could respond, Kong from behind had already walked over and said, I asked GJ to come back. He will go to the Adver waters with you and Sengoku. The matter is urgent. Please tell GJ about the situation on the way. Garp nodded and said, I understand, GJ, come with me. After saying that, Garp took GJ to the door and left. Garp was in a hurry to find Roger to fight, and briefly talked about the mission on the way. In fact, when GJ heard the name Adwal, he knew what was going on. It was nothing more than Golden Lion and Roger. Arriving at the headquarters port, Sengoku was already on the warship. According to the original storyline, Kizaru, Akainu and Aokiji should also participate in this mission. But now, both of them have been awarded the rank of Vice Admiral and were sent to the G2-G3 branch as base commanders. Since the Battle of Adwal was an emergency, they were unable to arrive in time. As for Aokiji, he joined the army a year earlier than in the original work, so he is still in Marine School. Garp couldn't wait any longer. He jumped directly onto the deck of the warship, while GJ used Kamui to keep up. Sengoku ignored Garp, who shouted to set off as soon as he got on the boat, and said to GJ, GJ, do you understand everything about this situation? GJ nodded and said, Understood, Sengoku Admiral, shall we set off now? Under Garp's resentful gaze, Sengoku waved his hand to signal for the boat to sail. He glanced at Garp and said angrily, Don't look at me like that. I'm an admiral. My rank is higher than yours. The warships here must obey my command. Garp turned his head away and muttered, Tisk, I don't want to be an admiral anyway. There are too many things to do. There is no freedom at all. I think you don't want to come into contact with celestial dragons. Haha, Sengoku, you understand me. GJ stood aside and looked at the sea silently. Edwall Sea, Lion, Thousand Slice Valley. God avoid. Roger jumped into the air with the Supreme Sword Ace emitting red and black lightning in his hand, blocking all the golden slash waves that flew over. After landing back on the ship, Rayleigh came to Roger and said solemnly, Roger, the current situation is not favorable for us. If we continue to fight, I'm afraid. Roger certainly realized this. Golden Lion's flying pirate group has many people and ships, and the members are not the kind of small fish that can be easily stunned by conquerors. The most difficult thing is the ability of Golden Lion. In this sea, he has absolute air superiority and can also control the sea water to attack. It is really difficult for Roger pirates with only one ship to deal with it. Some of the members of the flying pirates have already rushed to the Jackson where Roger is, and started a fierce battle on the ship. The floating golden lion laughed and shouted to Roger below. Roger, you still have time to regret now, become my subordinate. Let's rule the world together. Roger snorted coldly and released his conquerors. A huge wave instantly rose on the sea. He responded to Shiki with conquerors. On the deck, a red-haired boy and a red-nosed boy stood back to back, looking at Roger's back. A trace of longing appeared in the red-haired boy's eyes, and he turned his head and said, "Buggy, Captain Roger is really hockey." The red-nosed boy held two swords and chopped down an enemy who was much taller than him. He said unhappily, "Shanks, you still have the mood to flatter the captain. Save your life first." The two were the future 4 emperors, red-haired Shanks and Clown Buggy. Now they are only 12 years old. When Shanks heard Buggy say that he was flattering, he wanted to say a few words in displeasure, but it distracted his attention. A member of the flying pirates had rushed behind him, raised his sword and looked at Shanks' head, grinning and shouting, "Go to hell, kid." When Shanks found the enemy behind him, it was too late. He widened his eyes, and the gradually enlarged blade was reflected in his pupils. Roger has always been very concerned about Shanks. Even when he was fighting with Golden Lion, he would pay attention to Shanks' direction from time to time. When he saw that he was in danger, he would immediately save him. Suddenly, a dark vortex appeared in front of Shanks. After GGE's figure condensed, he grabbed the arm of the pirate in front of him. With a scream, the pirate who wanted to cut Shanks covered his twisted arm with horror. Before he could figure out the situation, GJ raised his hand again and pressed it on his face, and a dark vortex appeared immediately. In Shanks' dull eyes, a headless corpse gushing blood fell to the ground with a plop. Looking at the marine coat fluttering behind GJ, Shanks was completely stunned. GJ turned slowly, looking down at Shanks, who was less than his waist, and said lightly, "Didn't Roger teach you not to be distracted when fighting? You, Marine?" Shanks stared at GJ with disbelief. Buggy got up from the ground after being kicked to the ground. When he saw GGE's face clearly, his body trembled suddenly, pointed at GJ and stammered, "Big Admiral candidate, Black Dragon. Nani?" Shanks took a step back in shock, but GJ suddenly flicked one hand, and a black knife appeared in his hand. This action frightened Shanks and Buggy. At this moment, a golden sword energy fell from the sky. Sulfuric acid. A sharp collision sounded, followed by a powerful shock wave. Buggy and Shanks were knocked to the ground, and when they looked up again, they froze in place. I saw GJ raising his sword with one hand, against a huge golden slash wave, and the marine cloak on his body was blown away. This slash wave was obviously made by the Golden Lion. Just now he followed Roger's line of sight and spotted GJ, who suddenly appeared. When he saw the marine uniform GJ was wearing, he hit him with a sword energy without saying a word. But he never expected that his sword attack would be caught so easily by that marine. Even Roger's face showed a look of surprise. The fight between the two stopped temporarily. Roger took a serious look at GGE's face and suddenly said, "It turns out it's him." It seems Marine wasn't bragging. Golden Lion frowned and said, "Roger, what riddle are you talking about? Do you know Marine?" "Haha, he is GJ, codenamed Black Dragon, who was listed as a Marine Admiral candidate a year ago." After hearing this, Golden Lion thought for a moment and suddenly said, "Remember, the so-called leader of the Marine Supernova fought against Newgate once." While the two were talking, the black sword in GGE's hand shook. After the sword energy was dispersed, he looked at the Golden Lion, then his body twisted and disappeared from the place. Golden Lion and Roger were both stunned. They looked around, but after looking for a long time, they still couldn't find GJ. Roger raised his eyebrows and said, "This ability is really weird. Where did he go?" However, the Golden Lion attacked again. Fortunately, Roger was more knowledgeable. After avoiding the attack, he looked at the Golden Lion angrily and said, "Shiki, Marine has shown up, do you want to continue fighting?" Golden Lion smiled disdainfully and responded, "What Marine? Isn't he just a Marine brat? Let alone the alternate admiral. Even if the real Marine Admiral comes, don't even think about interfering in our battle. You're crazy. Ha ha ha." Compared with Captain Rock's back then, I am nothing. On the other side, Jijay had returned to the warship. Garp rushed over immediately after seeing Jijay and asked eagerly, Jijay, how is Roger over there? Garp's words sounded a bit awkward to Sengoku. It sounded like he was caring about Roger. Jijay looked up at the dim sky and said, the Roger pirates are already losing. By the time we get there, the battle over there will probably be over. Garp got even more anxious when he heard this. He threw off his cloak and wanted to use moonwalk to get there. Sengoku was quick and grabbed him, angrily saying, what are you going to do? Wouldn't it be a good thing for us marine in the world if either Roger or Golden Lion was destroyed? Garp's face froze when Sengoku shouted, and then he fell silent. Sengoku let go of his hand and turned to Jijay and said, Jijay, now you should be able to directly reach the location where Roger and Golden Lion are fighting, right? Jijay nodded. Just now, he used moonwalk to get there in advance, and then used Kamui to transfer space after sensing the movement of the battle. As long as he has been to a place, he will mark the spatial coordinates, and he can use Kamui to get there directly next time. By the way, the principle of Jijay Kamui is to use the gravity of darkness to distort space, so as to achieve the effect of space transfer. Jijay nodded and said, okay, I will go again later. Even if Golden Lion captures Roger pirates, they will definitely be seriously injured. Maybe I will get some unexpected gains after I go. Garp wanted to say something after hearing this, but Sengoku pressed his head down. Sengoku glared at Garp and said to Jijay, okay, but you must pay attention to safety. If the situation is not right, use your ability to withdraw immediately. We just need to know the result. Jijay smiled slightly and said, don't worry, Sengoku Admiral, I know what's going on. The warship continued to sail forward until a faint thunder sounded. Jijay, who was standing on the bow of the warship, narrowed his eyes and whispered, it's time. Then, Jiji's figure disappeared into the darkness again. In the Edwall Sea, Roger and Golden Lion's battle continued. Both of them were real Emperor-level strongmen. The aftermath of the battle alone destroyed more than one ship. Of course, all the ships belonged to Golden Lion. Roger only had one ship, the Jackson, but the hull was strong enough, and with the protection of Rayleigh and others, it would not be destroyed so easily. But this could not withstand the fact that there were too many people on the Golden Lion side. After a war of attrition, Roger's pirate group had begun to be unable to cope. A large number of pirate ships surrounded the Jackson, and the situation was already very dangerous for Roger's pirate group. Golden Lion fought with Roger with two swords in hand, and laughed wildly from time to time. Roger, it seems that today is the end of your pirate group. Roger said nothing. He knew that it was useless to be anxious now. If he wanted to get out of the predicament, he had to get rid of Shiki first. Without Shiki, the people and ships of the flying pirates would be useless. But after all, he was not Luffy in the movie version, and Shiki was not the damaged version of Golden Lion with the rudder inserted and both legs lost. Now the strength of the two was on par, and it was impossible to decide the winner in a short time. Slash wave. Golden Lion used all his strength to send out a giant golden sword energy, which pushed Roger back to the Jackson. Then, he put away his two swords and raised his hands upwards. In an instant, waves as high as 100 meters rose on the sea surface, and several huge lion heads condensed under the control of Golden Lion. Lion Majesty. Govern place earth coiling. All the giant lion heads made of seawater slammed into the Jackson. At this time, Rayleigh and others were entangled by their respective opponents. Roger had to send out sword energy one after another to block them, but on the sea, the endless seawater could provide Golden Lion with a continuous supply of attack resources. Roger was careless, and the Jackson was hit by a lion head. The hull shook violently, and Golden Lion became more and more excited, so that he did not notice the increasingly gloomy sky above. Just as Golden Lion manipulated the seawater to attack the Jackson wantonly, a deafening thunder suddenly sounded in the sky, followed by a torrential rain. Both sides of the battle were stunned. Before they could react, several powerful waterspouts suddenly rose from the sea. With just one encounter, a large number of ships of the Sky Pirates were swept into it and turned into fragments. This was not an ordinary storm, and the destructive power was rare. Even the lion head condensed by Golden Lion using seawater was blown away by the strong wind. The Golden Lion in the air was directly hit by a wave several meters high, directly breaking the deck of a ship. After Golden Lion was temporarily offline, the remaining Sky Pirates fleet seemed so vulnerable in the face of this natural disaster-level storm. A large number of ships were directly smashed by the surging waves, and all the pirates on the ship were buried in the sea. Compared with the tragic scene of the Sky Pirates, the Jackson, where the Roger Pirates were, was in a much better situation. Although it seemed that the Jackson was also shaky in the violent current, it did not suffer any substantial damage. This strong wind seemed to be sent by God to help the Roger Pirates escape. The fleet of the Sky Pirates had been destroyed beyond recognition, and a huge gap appeared in the encirclement where the Jackson was located. Driven by the strong wind, the Jackson was pushed out by itself without even human control, and finally disappeared without a trace. The disaster of the Sky Pirates continued, and many pirates had collapsed, kneeling on the deck and crying. Golden Lion was pulled out from under the deck by his men. He was hit by the seawater just now, soaked all over, and his body was weak. Otherwise, with his strength, he would not need his men to help. He shook his clothes, looked around, and his face instantly became extremely ugly. The storm almost destroyed half of his fleet. What he found most unacceptable was that the Roger Pirates had completely disappeared. Golden Lion was so angry that his face turned blue. He ignored his body covered with seawater and forcibly lifted off into the air, roaring to the sky, "This is unfair. God, why did you do this to me?" Golden Lion had just experienced a battle with Roger and was hit head-on by the seawater. Now he was mentally shocked again, and his body was on the verge of collapse. Just at this time, another strong wind came, and Golden Lion in the air was shaken and fell down again. The ship below could no longer withstand such a strong wind. The deck was broken into pieces, and a large number of debris flew together. Before Golden Lion fell, a broken rudder flew rapidly and hit Golden Lion's head squarely. Golden Lion's eyes turned white and he lost consciousness on the spot because of the broken rudder. The only remaining pirate on the ship was frightened and hurried over to lift Golden Lion and wanted to transfer him to a safe place. Suddenly, a dark vortex emerged out of thin air and condensed into Gigi's body. Seeing Gigi, the pirates holding Golden Lion were startled again, and the strength in their hands decreased sharply, and Golden Lion fell to the ground with a snap. A pirate pointed at Gigi and said tremblingly, "Marine." The other pirates immediately took out their weapons and pointed them at Gigi, but now their morale has fallen to the lowest point, and for a while no one dared to take the initiative to attack Gigi. Gigi didn't even look at these minions. He glanced at the half-dead Golden Lion on the ground, and then looked at the remaining pirate ships around, with an evil smile on his lips. The pirates looked at the smiling Gigi and couldn't help but feel a chill coming from the bottom of their hearts. One of them mustered up the courage, raised his knife and roared towards Gigi. Gigi drew out the knife with his hand, and blood spurted out from one of them. His head fell to the ground with a thud. The blood stained on his hands was absorbed by the darkness. Gigi raised his eyes slightly, and then, darkness like a tide surged out from under his feet. The remaining pirates on the ship did not even utter a scream, and were instantly swallowed up by the darkness. Only the Golden Lion was left lying on the deck. The rainstorm continued. Gigi raised his hand to suck Golden Lion over and strangled his neck. After all this action, Golden Lion regained some consciousness and half-consciously tried to open his eyes. Puff! Golden Lion's body trembled violently, his eyes widened suddenly, and he finally saw Gigi's face clearly. He slowly lowered his head, looked at Gigi's hand inserted into his chest, and said tremblingly, "Marine, how dare you?" Poof! Gigi pulled his hand out of Golden Lion's chest with an expressionless expression. The vitality of a strong man like Golden Lion was indeed not limited. Even if his heart was destroyed, he did not die immediately and could even lift up tremblingly. Hands, trying to make a final struggle. However, he was no longer a threat in front of Gigi. Dark vortex appeared on his hand, and Golden Lion's neck was instantly twisted into a twist. He made a whooshing sound in his mouth, and finally closed his eyes unwillingly. Golden Lion, a great hero of a generation, died in the hands of Gigi. The people on the surrounding pirate ships were still busy controlling the ship's retreat, and no one even noticed that their captain was dead. Gigi's hand holding the golden lion's neck turned into darkness, and he used the dark god to suck out the lion fruit and transferred it to a cantaloupe in the Dark Bible. Also sucked into the Dark Bible were the two famous swords of the golden lion, Sakuragi and Kuju. Glancing at golden lion's body, the twisted gravity was released from Gigi's hands again, and with a snap, golden lion's head separated from the body. At this time, a pirate ship finally approached. A large number of pirates jumped out of the ship and shouted while running. "Hey, how about Captain Shiki? Nani? Tick tock tock." The ground under Gigi's feet has been dyed red with the blood of the golden lion, and steaming blood is still dripping from the fractured part of his head. The pirates who saw this scene were so frightened that their weapons dropped from their hands, on the ground. What greeted them was a terrifying wave of darkness. After eliminating this wave of pirates, Gigi still did not leave. He raised his other hand and slowly opened his palm. Wisps of darkness gathered and finally condensed into a small black ball. There was a thunder in the sky again, and in the thunderlight, several indifferent faces flickered. The remaining people on the pirate ship finally realized something was wrong, and they all moved towards the ship where Gigi was. But when they were about to reach the ship, a small black ball slowly rose into the sky, and Gigi's body the shape gradually distorted until the moment it disappeared, he whispered. Dark planetary devastation. In the heavy rain, the black ball slowly rose into the sky. The members of the flying pirates were not ordinary pirates. They could feel a sense of crisis from the black ball. But what shocked them the most was the headless corpse lying on the deck. It was their captain, the golden lion who was jumping up and down not long ago. Captain Shiki. I don't know who took the lead in shouting, and then a large number of pirates rushed onto the deck. They really couldn't believe that Golden Lion was dead like this, but now there was no time for them to confirm the news. In the sky, the black ball had been introduced into the thick clouds. Then, a terrifying gravitational force erupted from it, and even the surrounding black clouds were instantly sucked into it. The heavy rain suddenly stopped and the sun poured down. The pirates below were all stunned. They looked up to the sky and saw that the original black ball had expanded several times, like a black ball. Sun. Someone murmured, "What is that?" As soon as he finished speaking, the sea water became violent again, and water pillars rose into the sky, all converging towards the black sun in the sky. All members of the flying pirates and their ships were all attracted high into the sky by a terrifying gravitational force. The pirates struggled desperately in the air, but their bodies still flew upwards uncontrollably. A large number of pirates were even penetrated by the rapidly rising hull fragments and died on the spot. First, countless hull fragments were wrapped on the surface of the black sun, and the pirates were all sucked to it. Looking up from below, they looked like a bunch of stuck ants. Finally, a large amount of seawater enveloped it, forming a clearly layered and huge sphere in the air. The sea area of Adver has once again returned to its usual tranquility. If it weren't for the huge sphere hanging in the sky, no one would have imagined that a fierce battle had just occurred here. The result of this battle was the destruction of the flying pirates. Gigi returned to the warship. Marine on the warship was stunned when he saw Gigi. Then his eyes widened and his chin became longer and longer. Even Sengoku and Garp were dumbfounded on the spot. The reason why they were so rude was naturally because of the bloody human head Gigi was holding in his hand. Although the head was disheveled, everyone recognized it at a glance. It was Golden Lion Shiki. After a while, Sengoku finally came to his senses, but there was still a look of disbelief on his face. He swallowed, walked to Gigi step by step, and whispered. Gigi, this is Shiki, Golden Lion Shiki. Gigi smiled slightly and raised his hand so that Golden Lion's face was facing Sengoku. Sengoku could still see the deep reluctance in Golden Lion's wide eyes. Sengoku immediately fell silent, and Garp rushed over. He put his face against it, looked at Golden Lion's face carefully, and exclaimed. It's unbelievable, Shiki is really dead. When he shouted, the warship exploded, and everyone felt as if they were in a dream. The Golden Lion Shiki, who was in his prime and at the height of his power, was really dead. Sengoku took a few deep breaths to suppress the shock in his heart. He looked at Gigi and said in a deep voice. Gigi, was Shiki killed by Roger, or? In fact, he already had the answer in his mind, because judging from the death of Golden Lion, there was a high probability that it was not Roger who did this, and Roger was not so ruthless. Jie threw Golden Lion's head on the ground and said, "I killed it. I was lucky enough to catch something." Then, Jie gave a general description of what had just happened. Sengoku was stunned for a while, and then looked at the dead-eyed Golden Lion on the ground. He no longer knew what to say. He couldn't help but wonder, what kind of outrageous thing did this guy Golden Lion do to be so unlucky? It was also a natural disaster, but nothing happened to Roger. He was even a blessing in disguise, and escaped from danger directly due to the strong wind. The Golden Lion was directly hit by natural disasters and suffered most of his personnel losses. The most outrageous thing is that with his strength, he was knocked unconscious by a ship's rudder. Of course, a large part of the reason is because Golden Lion is such a coquettish person. He was still showing off in midair during the tsunami, and was caught by the tsunami, causing his body to temporarily enter a state of weakness. Then, he met Jie, an old man, and they had an in-depth exchange of heartfelt, head-and-blooded conversations. Garp breathed a sigh of relief after hearing this. He captured a key piece of information, that is, Roger ran away and he could pursue Roger again. But the news of Golden Lion's death is great news for Marine and the world. The Marine officers on the ship have cheered. Sengoku's energy has increased, and his face is red with excitement. Patting Ji's shoulder hard, Sengoku praised. "Well done, Jie. Thanks to you for coming along this time." Jie smiled and said, "As a Marine, this is what I'm supposed to do." This calm performance makes it hard for people to believe that Jie is just a young Marine of 18 years old. You must know that he just killed Golden Lion Shiki with his own hands. Sengoku really likes Jie more and more the more he sees him. If he were the marshal now, with Ji's achievements, he would want to directly promote Jie to admiral. I just don't know what level Ji's strength has reached now, but Sengoku feels that Ji's talent has grown a lot in this year. Moreover, not everyone can pick up the Golden Lion. Although the quality of Golden Lion's men is average, they are large in quantity. It is not easy to kill Golden Lion in the hands of those people. Thinking of this, Sengoku asked casually, "Jie, there should be a lot of people in the Sky Pirates left. Those people are also dangerous elements. Which direction did they run to? Let's take this opportunity to kill them all." Jie responded, "There's no need to chase Sengoku Admiral. I've already cleaned them up. We just need to continue to Admiral to accept the results." "Nani?" Sengoku was startled again, but considering that the surprise Jie had brought to him previously was too strong, he didn't ask any more questions this time and quickly waved his hand to order the warship to move on. By the time they arrived at the Adver waters, it was already calm. Everyone on the warship looked around, hoping to see some floating shipwrecks or pirate corpses. As a result, they saw nothing but sea water. Just when they were wondering if they were in the wrong place, Jie pointed towards the sky. "I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more."